Season 1, Episode 1, The Sopranos. Often dubbed by critics and fans alike as one of the greatest TV shows to ever happen in the history of TV shows made ever in the history of ever. The Sopranos centers around the life of Tony Soprano, as he attempts to maneuver both through his family life and his business life as a member of the New Jersey Mafia without getting his ass kicked. The show is often cited as one of the most important and influential television programs ever created, credited as beginning the second golden age of television and popularizing / inspiring the rise of many other serialized television shows like Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead, and many more. The show has won an ungodly amount of awards, praised endlessly for its amazing writing, incredible acting, beautiful cinematography, blah 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 blah. Before we can get to that part, we gotta talk about something way more important. The show's absolutely legendary intro. We're taken on a drive in Tony Soprano's car as we travel down the highways of New Jersey, with the song Woke Up This Morning by Alabama 3 playing in the background. Now look, there are some great TV intros out there. As much as I love the and the nothing's ever going to beat Woke up this morning, got yourself a gun. Got yourself a gun. It's easily one of the most iconic intros of all time, and if you skip the intro while watching any episode, in the nicest way possible, you deserve to be publicly executed. The show opens up with Tony Soprano sitting in the waiting room of a therapist's office, staring at a statue of a woman with a pair of massive badonkadonks. The therapist, named Dr. Jennifer Melfi, tells Tony to take a seat, and says that his doctor told her about a panic attack that Tony had recently. Tony isn't exactly thrilled with this label, implying to Melfi that he was forced to go to therapy and that he totally feels fine now.
What line of work are you in?
Waste management consultant.
No, you aren't, idiot! You're in the Mafia! Melfi can tell that Tony is bullshitting her as Tony tells her about the stress that he's been feeling lately, claiming that he feels as if he's come in dead last at the end of the glory days. He reminisces about his father and how he used to have it much better in life, and that now, things just aren't the same. One aspect of the show that I love is its setting, taking place during the year that the show was created, 1999, with each season representing roughly around a year in time passing by. It not only gives very obvious commentary on certain events that had taken place during this time period, but it also allows the show to take an incredibly unique angle with the Mafia. In other TV shows and movies, the Mafia is usually depicted as these super rich, sketchy businessmen all geared up in a suit and tie constantly with a $1 million mansion, surrounded by wealth and a loving family. The Sopranos, however, takes a much more blunt and honest direction with its characters, with many of them being depicted as living a somewhat modest and dysfunctional lifestyle. And the show immediately takes advantage of this situation by having Tony express his dissatisfaction with the world around him, along with a ton of other angles that I'll be getting to later. Melfi asks Tony if he's had these strong feelings of loss before the panic attack, and we're taken to Tony's pool, as he excitedly starts feeding bread to a family of ducks. We're introduced to the rest of the family, with Tony's daughter, Meadow, talking to her friend about how batshit insane her dad is, and Tony's wife, Carmela, celebrating her son AJ's birthday by giving him a kiss on his fat cheeks. Tony goes as he excitedly calls out to the kids that the ducks are trying to fly out of the pool, and he tells AJ happy birthday before slapping his wife's ass. Carmela asks Tony if he'll be home early for AJ's birthday, but Tony is too distracted reading about ducks and is like, yeah, sure, whatever.
This isn't gonna work. I can't talk about my personal life.
Finish telling me about the day you collapsed.
Tony carefully tries to tiptoe around the fact that he kills people for a living as he talks about his family business, and begins to talk about Christopher Moltisanti, an up-and-comer in the Mafia. Tony acts as a sort of father figure to Chris, referring to him as his nephew even though they're technically cousins, but that's too complicated, we'll talk about it later. Tony continues to read out of the bird book as he asks Chris if he got any work done, but Chris says, wham, my stomach hurted this morning, I couldn't do any work, as he drives a $60,000 Lexus. The two spot a man who owes them a lot of money, and they stop in the middle of a busy road so they can give the man a nice hello. Melfi, who can tell that this Tony guy isn't exactly working with a nice group of people, lays some ground rules for their therapy sessions, telling Tony, hey, we might have client confidentiality, but don't tell me about any crimes now. Tony says okay and tells Melfi about some crimes, under the guise of saying that he just had some coffee with an eager gentleman. Help! We get this great scene of Tony and Chris chasing the man down, with Tony nearly mowing down half the population of New Jersey as he eventually hits the guy with his car while everybody watches.
You all right?
My leg's broken, the bone's coming through. Ah!
What are you doing? Get over here! That's $3,000 here. $3,000.
Oh, okay. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,000. 3,000 $3,
Shut up.
We're finally introduced to the mob side of Tony's life, as Tony talks with some of his associates, including Paulie Walnuts Galtieri and Sal Big Pussy Bopanciro. Hey, don't laugh! They talk about a Czechoslovakian group bidding against them for a waste management contract, and Chris decides to take up the opportunity to prove himself by taking care of this group, as Tony mocks him for having a wham-wham diarrhea stomachache. Silvio crashes the party and asks for some food.
What are you doing here?
Hey, Gabriela says we're down here for the gabagool.
It's back, baby. Tony tells Melfi about his uncle, Corrado Jr. Soprano, whom he claims adds to his general stress level, as Silvio tells Tony that Jr.'s going to kill a dude named Little Pussy Malanga in the restaurant of Tony's childhood best friend, Artie Bucco, which would probably not be a good look for Artie's restaurant. Tony heads over to the restaurant with Chris, and says hello to Jr. as well as Artie, whose wife is not exactly thrilled with him being friends with a mafia boss. Nerd! Tony tells Melfi about how Jr. is starting to become an old cranky fuck, telling her about the time that Jr. said that he'd never become a varsity athlete when he was young and how it hurt his feelings, an event that will never come up again. Tony stops by his mother's house to deliver a radio, and we're introduced to said mother, Livia Soprano, who is the most god-awful piece of shit to ever exist on the planet. She's like Chuck McGill if Chuck was haunted by the hounds of Satan.
What's that?
CD player.
For who? For me? Yeah. I don't want it.
Livia has a raging hate boner for Tony, constantly batting down any of his attempts to cheer her up and make her feel better, as Tony tells her that it's time to move on from the death of her husband. Livia continues her bitching and brings up the nursing home that Tony is trying really hard to move her into, and while Tony defends him by calling it a
Retirement community.
Livia still thinks it sucks. Tony tries one more attempt to get through to her, telling her to get through to Junior, since she's essentially one of the few people that he still respects, but Livia tells Tony to fuck off once more.
Daughters are better at taking care of their mothers than sons.
Yeah, and I bought CDs for a broken record.
Oh my god! We're taken back to the house as Father Intantola, who works at the church that the Sopranos go to, greets the family. And AJ comes out, telling Tony that he got a call from Livia and saying that she cried like a little baby bitch.
She needs a purpose in life.
No, your mother is tougher than you think.
So what, no fucking ZD now?
Hey!
Tony works on the grill as he happily watches the ducks swim around in his pool. However, the ducks aren't there to swim much longer, as they begin to fly out of the pool, and they eventually fly away from the scene. This, combined with the stress of his family and his business, suddenly causes Tony's brain to go ape shit, and he has a panic attack and falls to the ground. Tony is placed on an MRI machine as Carmela comes in to give him company. This nice visit quickly turns sour as Carmela angrily talks to Tony about a side chick, or Gumar as they call them in the show, that Tony claims he isn't seeing anymore. And with Tony accusing Carmela of cheating on him with Father Intantola, Carmela claims that Tony's going to hell when he dies as she waves bye-bye to him in the machine. Meanwhile, Chris confronts Emil, one of the Czechs trying to compete for the waste management contract, and tricks him into going into the back of the pork store for cocaine so Chris can turn him into some fresh bacon. I love how the show quietly cuts to photos of other real-life gangsters as Chris fires away, almost like they're initiating him into this lifestyle. Tony, having his balls kicked in by his mother once again, is forced to confront Junior himself, telling him not to kill Malanga in Artie Bucco's restaurant since it would hurt Artie's business and reputation. But Junior and his associates tell him to eat ass.
You may run North Jersey, but you don't run your Uncle Junior. How many fucking hours did I spend playing catch with you?
It's pretty clear that Junior is doing this specifically out of jealousy towards Tony, as while Tony is rising up in the ranks of the business, Junior is declining big time. And the age gap is brought up here as a sort of way for Junior to be like, yeah, you might be better than me, but I'm older than you. Yeah, that's right, I win. Eat that, bitch! Melfi asks Tony to start focusing on his immediate family, and Tony talks about how Carm and Meadow are not exactly on the best terms. As Carm and Intantola watch TV, they hear thumping outside the house, and Carm takes a rational approach by pulling out this massive fucking gun. It turns out to just be Meadow sneaking out to her boyfriend's house though, and Carm grounds her ass and prevents her from going to Hunter's camping trip. Tony figures that it'll all blow over as he silently worries to himself, and Melfi points out that he told Dr. Cusamano that he felt depressed. Tony quickly changes the topic and discusses Melfi's background and where she's from, and subtly hits on her by saying that Livia would have loved if they got together as he bites down on his bottom lip. Wait, hold on, what does that usually mean again? Let me look this up. Oh. Melfi tries her best to shift the conversation back to Tony's depression and panic attacks, but Tony strikes back, telling Melfi that it's dumb and stupid for guys to have feelings and wishes that there were more people like Gary Cooper, the strong, silent type.
I had a semester and a half of college, so I understand Freud. I understand therapy as a concept. But in my world, it does not go down. Could I be happier? Yeah. Yeah. Who couldn't?
Melfi strikes back at the strike back by simply asking Tony if he feels depressed, and Tony defeatedly admits that he's felt this way ever since the ducks left. While Melfi tries to continue the conversation further by raising the question of the significance of these ducks, Tony storms out of the room in frustration. These therapy scenes are some of the absolute best that the show has to offer. As the series continues on, these scenes will serve as these incredibly interesting and gripping explorations into the mind of Tony Soprano, and how he processes and deals with the world around him. In this scene, he brings up ideals of being the strong, silent type and being able to handle your own emotions without asking for support from others. It's clear that Tony desperately wants to be this strong, silent type, but the moment Melfi bluntly asks Tony about his feelings, he realizes that he simply can't handle the weight of what he's feeling. A thought which is especially supported by the fact that he literally just suffered a panic attack like 10 minutes ago. It probably also doesn't help that this was all brought on by a bunch of ducks leaving his pool. Now, we'll get to the significance of those ducks later, but for now, Tony is way too cool to talk about his feelings. Big Pussy and Chris throw out the body of Emil, which goes well. Pussy criticizes Chris for acting rashly, and they decide to cut up the body instead. And we're taken to the nursing home, where Tony walks around with Livia and the rest of the family around the place. Livia quickly realizes that she's in a nursing home and begins bitching and moaning to the tour guide, and Tony nearly shits himself.
I know every people come here to die.
Melfi welcomes Tony back to the office as Tony begins to talk about his father, and how he went from being a big, tough guy to worn down to nothing more than a nub mentally by Livia until he died. He also talks about how hypocritical his mother is, and how she went from complaining and wearing his father down when he was alive to acting like he was a saint when he died. He also admits that his job isn't treating him well, and how he's dealing with a RICO case. He describes himself as a sad clown, laughing on the outside, but crying on the inside, constantly having to put on a persona around his partners to seem tougher than he really is. He also describes his frustration and paranoia around his partners getting pinched and even potentially ratting themselves to the government, essentially admitting to Melfi that his waste management job is fake and dumb. Melfi prescribes Tony some medication, as the show prescribes the viewers at home that don't like deep and thoughtful conversation scenes with a big fat pair of tits. Yep, this show is made by HBO, no limits, so I really hope you guys like blur effects. Chris and Tony have a talk with a guy named Hesh, a close friend of Tony's, at Bada Bing, a strip club owned by Tony and his associates. They talk about the dude that got run over by the car earlier and how he doesn't have any money left, as well as how little pussy Malanga is gonna get whacked by Junior soon, which Hesh mistakes for big pussy.
Oh, little pussy.
Yeah, little pussy. You think he's gonna fuck my pussy?
Hesh tells Tony about Junior's mad jealousy over having to take orders from Tony. And while Tony tries to defend him, saying that Junior's family, Hesh still insists that Junior has a major screw loose. Hesh also insists on getting Artie out of town for a few weeks so that it'll force the restaurant to close down, which gives Tony a great idea. While Tony comes up with another idea inspired by his MRI visits to get Mr. I got run over with a car to fork over the money, Carm attempts to cheer Meadow up by taking her out of town, but Meadow tells her to fuck off. Carmela tries to scold Meadow, telling her that she can't just break whatever rule she doesn't like all willy-nilly, which is really funny coming from the same lady who's married to a mafia boss and is willfully ignorant and compliant with his actions. And judging by this look Meadow gives her, it's safe to assume that she's probably thinking the same thing. Tony goes to Artie's restaurant and gives him some tickets so that he can go on vacation. And while Artie's pretty happy to score some free tickets, his wife Charmaine thinks otherwise, saying that accepting free tickets from a mobster is a bad idea.
Come on, Arthur. Somebody donated their kneecaps for those tickets.
I think it was his kneecaps! Mr. Ouchie My Foot Hurts talks to Pussy and Hesh, who convince him into creating false claims to pay out to the organization so that he can actually pay off his debts. And by convince, I mean threaten to throw his body into the river. Dick tells Tony that the checks are officially out of the bidding war, and that Artie is here to see Tony, who tells Tony that he can't accept the tickets. Meanwhile, Melfi is out on a hot date with Harrison Ford, and Tony runs into her while on a date with a Gumar, who thanks her for the decorating tips by getting her and her date a table early. Tony later goes on a date with Carmela, who points out Tony's improving mood, and Tony confesses to Carm that he's been seeing a therapist and taking Prozac. While Carmela nearly pisses herself in excitement, Tony tells her to calm down, since therapy is a ginormous no-no when it comes to the mafia, and says to keep her mouth shut about this. Carm's like, you'd better have fucking told them about your horrible idiot mother, and the two briefly bond over how out of balance things have gotten in life, what with Tony's mother being an ass and Meadow being angry with Carm. Chris tells Tony that it's almost time to put the plan into action, and And Tony tells Silvio that it's time as he watches Meadow's volleyball game, in which Meadow complains about Carmela not being there. Tony ignores her ass as he takes her inside a church, which Tony says was built by their great-grandfather and his brother Frank. Tony once again delves into his longing for the good old days, saying that you can't find two guys who can even build a decent ground floor for a bathtub these days. Much like other mobster films, Tony has a deep respect and even admiration for his family that came before him, treating his mother with kindness even as she bitches 24/7, defending Junior even while he's trying to screw Tony over, and basing a majority of his morals and values on the people that came before him, especially his father. These traditions, however, often conflict with the same emotional issues that Tony gets from his parents, as well as the changing morals and values of the modern times, which will make for great conflict as the series progresses. Alright, enough introspection, time to watch Artie Bucco's restaurant blow up. Yay! Tony goes back to therapy, saying, "Hey, I feel better, thanks for the help, I'm out!" But Melfi points out that this good mood isn't just because of the Prozac, but rather actually coming to therapy and talking his issues out. Tony takes up this opportunity to talk things out and recounts an incredibly sad, tragic, and poetic dream that he had the night before.
My penis falls off.
Tony talks about how a bird swooped down and grabbed his penis right out of his hand, and Melfi quickly connects the dots, asking Tony what kind of bird it was.
Pelican? Flamingo?
What about ducks?
Oh. Tony talks about how much of a trip it felt to watch a family of ducks grow and bond in his pool, and how sad it felt for him to see them go. Tony begins to connect the dots, realizing that he himself is afraid of losing his family, and begins to cry, chastising himself in the process.
What are you so afraid's going to happen?
I don't know.
At AJ's newly scheduled party, Artie Bucco complains to Tony about how he hates seeing his restaurant burn to the ground. And Tony says, "Nah, it's fine, just talk it out, you'll be fine." This makes things worse. As Tony tries to comfort Artie, he sees Chris mumbling to himself in the gazebo, and tells Artie to cook as he checks in on what's the matter. It turns out that Chris is mad at Tony for not giving him a thank you for taking care of the Czechoslovakians. And in a shocking twist, Tony actually admits fault, telling Chris that not being supported for his efforts was the way that he was parented, and that he wants to make things right. Chris immediately ruins this good faith by pitching the idea of turning his mafia life into a movie, which makes Tony incredibly angry at first. However, after a moment, Tony calms down, telling Chris to forget about this venue and to focus on what really matters. Junior drives Livia to AJ's party, complaining to her about Tony and how he's becoming a big shot within the New Jersey mob. He complains about how things aren't like the good old days, saying that Tony is a part of the new generation and that Junior isn't free to run his business like he's used to. Pretty ironic that, despite the generational conflict between the two, Junior and Tony both share the same longing for the good old days issue. However, instead of potentially bonding with his nephew over this, his jealousy over Tony's position still gets the best of him.
Something may have to be done, Livia, about Tony. I don't know.
Once they arrive, everyone goes inside to eat, as the camera lingers on a shot of the empty pool, ending the episode. What an incredible start to the series. I've talked about this before in some of my previous content, but pilot episodes are some of the absolute hardest to write in any TV show, being given the not at all easy task of not only introducing the audience to its characters and story, but also being just, for a lack of a better term, good. You know, hook the audience in for more. Give them a reason to watch your show. This episode not only did that, but did it with flying colors. It perfectly introduces us to the world of The Sopranos, hooking the audience in with a setting that's incredibly unique not only to television in general, but to mobster media as a whole. Like, go back to that scene with Carm talking to Father Phil. During that scene, she describes Tony really enjoying mobster movies like The Godfather, parts 1 and 2. She even describes how disappointed Tony was with watching the third one.
Tony prefers 2, not 1?
Yeah, he likes the part where Vito goes back to Sicily. 3 was like, what happened?
These movies obviously served as a big inspiration for The Sopranos. However, there's one mob movie that I would argue made the biggest impact on this series.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Goodfellas is one of my personal favorite movies of all time, so it's no surprise to me that I could see this movie's fingerprints all over this show, but most especially this episode. Throughout Goodfellas, the main character, Henry Hill, narrates over the events as the movie goes throughout his life, a narrative device shared in this episode.
At 13, I was making more money than most of the grown-ups in the neighborhood. I mean, I had more money than I could spend. I had it all.
The morning of the day I got sick, I've been thinking, it's good to be in something from the ground floor. I came too late for that. I know.
Not only that, but a handful of the actors from Goodfellas not only make appearances in this show, but also serve as major characters throughout its entire run, including Lorraine Bracco, Michael Imperioli, and Tony Sirico. I'm sure that there are many more comparisons out there, but those are the most obvious ones that I wanted to address. The show manages to find its own identity pretty quickly as the show goes on, ditching the whole Tony narration gimmick after the first episode. But it's pretty striking how similar the pilot of the show is to Goodfellas, technically speaking at least. Hey, if you're gonna copy off something, might as well be the best movie ever created. I loved watching Tony eventually realize the significance of the ducks flying away from his pool, even through such a strange dream of him getting his ding-a-ling stolen by a duck, which I personally believe represents Tony's belief, likely learned from his father, that having a family is what truly makes you a man. And by losing it, he not only loses the people that he loves, but also what makes him a man, represented by him quite literally getting his manhood stolen by the ducks. Anyways, I thought this episode was pretty incredible on rewatch. The writing overall was fantastic, the acting was amazing, it was an overall solid start to the show. I'm giving this episode a high A tier. Season 1, Episode 2. 46 long. The episode starts off with one of the only cold opens in the entire series, with the boys shit-talking a news piece covering the mafia as they count up all of their money. The piece declares that the government is cracking down on the mob big time, with a former mob soldier claiming that the party's over, calling back to Tony's insecurities that he described at the beginning of the last episode.
Government witness turned best-selling author. He is a wise guy. Please elaborate.
I mean, now, do I mean that organized crime is just going to pack its bags voluntarily and go the way of the dodo bird?
Listen, they're not going the way of the dodo bird.
What the fuck? Woke up this morning, got myself a gun. And then I woke up the next day, got another gun.
Chris and his friend Brendan kickstart some brand new schemes to earn some money and prove themselves, holding a truck driver at gunpoint so that they can steal some DVD players. The truck driver's like, wait, beat me up real quick so it doesn't look like I'm in on it. And Brendan and Chris happily help out by beating the shit out of him.
No, wait.
The next morning, AJ talks about how his science teacher got his car stolen recently, and Carm tells Tony that he should really help out with this, and Tony agrees, but only after coming up with the idea to threaten the science teacher into raising AJ's grade. Carm's like, no, what the fuck, he has to work for those. But Tony goes, la la la, I don't fucking care, slaps his wife's ass again, and goes right back to bed like a true Italian-American patriot. Chris shows off his massive massive load of DVD players with Brendan, but Tony acts like a massive dickhead to Brendan for no reason. And when Chris tells Tony to lighten up on Brendan, Tony says that they already discussed that. As Tony's idiot bartender accidentally hangs up on an important call, Chris tries to convince Tony that Brendan's not all that bad, which Tony disagrees with by bringing up Brendan's meth habit. Tony, already very annoyed, decides to piss himself off even more by calling his mother. Livia decides to act like an unbearable c*** as usual, complaining to Tony that he never calls her even though he called yesterday, and decides to make herself the center of attention by nearly burning her house to the ground. Burn, 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 burn! Oh, all of this stresses the fuck out of Tony, and he has Carm go over to the house as he attempts to handle a metric fuck ton of other deals and incidents. Carm tells Livia that she really needs some company to be there in times of need, to the point of even offering her to live with Tony and the family. But Livia says that she'd rather be a miserable ass, and pretends to cry about her dead husband. Pussy works at the auto body shop, where one of the workers gives him a progress report on the science teacher's stolen car, saying that they spotted a guy trying to bring in a suspiciously similar looking Saturn for parts. He tells Pussy that the guy's working at a coffee shop, and Pussy heads there to try and track the guy down. This venture ends up being a bust, as they end up with one angry rant from Paulie about how America keeps taking Italian foods and bastardizing them for profit, and exactly 0 leads. We cut to another therapy scene, where Tony tells Melfi about a caretaker that they hired to look after Livia. He says that he feels guilty over not being able to take care of his mother, and says that essentially everyone else in her life has completely cut contact with her due to her asshole personality. Melfi says that Tony shouldn't bear all this guilt anyway, as her terrible personality wouldn't have been practical to deal with. But Tony argues back, saying that she's still family at the end of the day, and blames Carm for denying Livia's entry into their home. While Tony describes Livia as a little old lady, Melfi disagrees with this, saying that Livia has a powerful grip on his life, and asks what positive experiences Tony has had with Livia to justify this respect. Yeah, exactly. Tony actually does come up with a positive experience, though it's only a story about how Livia once laughed at his dad falling down the stairs, but still contends that she's a good woman, continuing to keep the blame that Livia has manipulated him into bearing on himself by talking about how bad of a person he is for bitching about his mom to Melfi and not letting her stay at the house. Tony decides to get some flowers for his mom, and the door is answered by Livia's new caretaker, who Tony has a very pleasant and not at all racially motivated exchange with her.
Let's get one thing straight. In the hours you're here taking care of my mother, no ganja, okay?
Damn, Tony's kind of racist. Hope that doesn't happen again. Tony attempts to give Livia the flowers, but Livia says no because she sucks. We once again see the influence Livia has on Tony, as she also acts racist towards the caretaker, immediately assuming that she stole a plate from the house. Tony tries to tell Livia that the caretaker seems like a nice lady, but Livia continues to assume the worst and says that she wants to die, which once again stresses the hell out of Tony. Tony decides to put his foot down for a change, telling Livia that the caretaker's staying, and Livia tells Tony that Uncle Junior called, saying that he sounded annoyed. Junior has a sit-down with Tony and acting boss Jackie Aprile, who tells the two that he's pissed at Chris and Brendan for hijacking the DVDs from the trucks, since Junior's being paid to protect said trucks. Tony decides not to escalate any conflict, and promises that he'll have Chris and Brendan pay off any restitution to Junior. Junior tells Tony that he doesn't trust Chris and Brendan, calling the two loose cannons. But Tony stops this argument right in his tracks by shaming Junior for forcing a sick man out of bed. As it turns out, Jackie Aprile has cancer, and he says that he's going through chemo and considers coming up with a successor soon. Junior tells Tony that he's glad he's having someone look over Livia while secretly shit-talking about it behind his back, while Tony shit-talks one of Junior's guys, Mikey Palmisi, right to his face.
It's too bad they don't have a telethon for fuckface-itis, huh? They found a cure yet? Come on, I'm just kidding you. You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right.
You all right?
You all right?
You all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see you later.
Pussy finally finds a lead at a different coffee shop as Paulie continues to angrily stew about the injustices that are big American coffee brands. He steals a coffee pot for literally no reason as Carm heads to Livia's house, where the caretaker angrily walks out of the house and says that she's quitting. Livia says some shit about how she hates black people as Tony berates Chris and Brendan for not paying their restitutions to Junior yet. Chris tries to act like an alpha male and says that he's not paying up, complaining about how he always feels undermined in the business and how he should be a made guy already. But Tony says womp womp and calls Chris an immature little baby. Brendan says that they don't need to pay up to Jackie, since Tony has essentially become the unofficial acting boss with him being bedridden, and makes a joke that rubs Tony slightly the wrong way.
Come on, everybody knows you really run things since Jackie became the Kimosabi.
Tony once again reinforces his position and tells Chris to pay up the fucking money, and to not mess with Junior's trucks again. Paulie and Pussy interrogate the dude who stole a science teacher's Saturn, and they hold him and his boyfriend at gunpoint, demanding to know where he put the Saturn. They go to an auto body shop, where it's revealed that the Saturn's already in the process of getting wrecked for parts. However, the license plate is still intact, so Pussy tells the gentleman to hijack another Saturn to take its place. Tony sadly looks out of the pool, waiting for the ducks to come back. Meadow calls him a lame loser as Carm says that Livia's picking up some friends of hers. This gives Tony another reason to gas up his mother despite her being a bitch, as he once again blames himself for supposedly thinking the worst of her and says that he's proud of Livia for doing the bare fucking minimum. We cut to Livia driving her friends home, where Livia has zero trouble dropping them off. Okay, I take back what I said about Livia. She's the best character in the show. I can't even lie, this scene is unironically what got me hooked on The Sopranos the first time I watched it. The timing in this scene is fucking perfect. That's right, it wasn't the deep intellectual conversation between Tony and Melfi that got me hooked. It was the old lady that went boom boom. Tony tells Melfi that they were down at the hospital until 2 in the morning, and that the doctors basically told Tony that Livia cannot live alone anymore. Melfi's like, wait, I thought you said she was still healthy and alert. And Tony's like, yeah, of course she is, why wouldn't she be? Melfi implies to Tony that she may feel depressed and be in need of social interaction, and basically says that her disgusting, decrepit ass needs to be strapped in a nursing home ASAP, which Tony agrees. Chris and Brendan attempt to get into a club, where the show pays tribute to Goodfellas once again by having Martin Scorsese, the director of the movie, enter into the club via limo.
Marty! Kundun! I liked it!
Shut up, Chris! What the fuck? Chris and Brendan get high on meth and plan another truck jacking because they're stupid. Chris complains about how messed up the current mafia hierarchy is and how he isn't made yet. And Tony goes to his mom's house, where she starts acting melodramatic about having to live at the Green Grove retirement home.
Retirement community.
Oh yeah, my bad. Telling Tony to keep a bunch of her belongings before she dies. Tony tries to convince Livia that everything will be fine, repeating Melfi's lines of this move beginning the most rewarding chapter of her life. And Livia reveals that she gave a bunch of valuable jewelry to her cousin Josephine, which pisses Tony off like crazy. Tony continues repeating a lot of what Dr. Melfi said to convince her that the retirement community is a great option. But Livia continues to act like a melodramatic asshole and tells Tony to just end her life already.
I'm not going to that place.
Then I will go to court and I will get a durable power of attorney over you and I will place you there.
Then kill me now.
Brendan meets up with Chris to pull the heist, but Chris bails out, as he's realized that the reason the whole hierarchy is fucked up is because everyone keeps backstabbing one another. And Brendan, high as a kite, decides to pull off the heist anyways the next day. He pulls it off with two other dudes, who accidentally kill the truck driver after dropping the gun from their pants. Fuck! Brendan realizes how fucked he is as we cut to Livia being transferred into the nursing home. She remains dead silent the entire time as Tony signs away, and Junior gives the nursing home a call, which Tony says he'll call back later. Later at home, Tony gets a call from Chris.
Yeah. Christ, I've been calling for hours. Give me a call back on an outside line.
Jesus Christ! One aspect of the show that I'll also be bringing up a lot is the occasionally really weird and abrupt editing. Like, okay, 90% of the time, the actual editing of the show, from a storytelling aspect, not a technical one, is really good, and doesn't drag a scene on for too long. But there are a lot of really weird technical decisions throughout the show that I'll be bringing up every once in a while. Like that really abrupt cut with Chris. Chris tells Tony the unfortunate news that Brendan hit one of Junior's trucks and killed the truck driver, which pisses Tony off for the 18th time this episode. Tony criticizes Brendan and Chris, and while Chris tries his best to tell Tony that none of this was his fault, Tony points out that Chris did nothing to assert any leadership and offer Brendan some guidance. Tony tells Chris and Brendan to give back the suits and apologize to Junior, and to deal with the dead body themselves. The rest of the guys take a free suit for themselves, as Silvio repeats the same line from earlier.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Just when I thought I was out, pulled me back in.
AJ's science teacher finally gets his Saturn back, and we're taken to this genuinely beautiful scene of Tony finishing up packing his mother's belongings. He looks through numerous photos from his childhood, featuring a much younger looking Livia and Tony Soprano. We're given a glimpse into Tony's mind as the soundtrack begins to swell in the background, showing us the overwhelming guilt that Tony feels about not being able to look after his mother. And he has a minor panic attack, falling onto a table as he recollects the events to Dr. Melfi in the office. Tony describes feeling sad about putting his mother away in a nursing home, and Melfi sympathizes with Tony while also asking him to admit the anger that he's feeling. Over the course of this episode, Tony has gradually shifted a lot of the blame onto Carmela for not accepting Livia into the home, despite Carm directly asking if she'd like to stay with them. Another instance of Livia's manipulation. Melfi points this out to Tony, asking him to at least acknowledge his displaced feelings of anger that he has toward his mother. But Tony is having none of it, and storms out of Melfi's office once again. Back at the Bing, the bartender continues to have even more trouble with the phones like a fucking moron. This inability to work a phone and not be able to tell the difference between a person and an answering machine reminds Tony of a certain little old lady. And Tony calmly processes his emotions and beats the ever-loving shit out of the bartender. Yet another solid episode. Livia's presence as a straight-up villain is increased tenfold in this episode, as we get a lot more screen time dedicated to her bitching and moaning constantly. There are a lot of similarities between her and Chuck McGill. Both are family members that actively hate members of their own family despite said members' love and dedication towards them. Both manipulate and abuse others into getting what they want. And most importantly, both are victims of house fires of their own creation. In this case, however, Livia is a lot more evil than Chuck is, as she's not only about 4 times more annoying, but she is actively just a horrible, evil person. At the very least, Chuck respected others and was actually a smart and cunning person. Livia's just a bitch. I love the side plot between Pussy and Polly that, while insignificant in the long run, does a fantastic job of establishing their dynamic and personalities. A lot of this first season does a ton of testing around with certain characters and gimmicks and all that, like we saw earlier with the cold open, which is one of the only ones that occurs in the entire series, along with music that plays in the background during Tony's minor panic attack. Another very rare element in the show. The Sopranos very rarely uses music to convey emotion, as it not only makes certain scenes way more tense, tense, but it also allows the audience to come to their own conclusions about how they feel about certain scenes. Christopher's side plot with Brendan was also very fun to watch as well. The pacing is really good, there were some great action scenes, Livia hitting her friend in the car was a double S-tier scene. This was just a great episode all around. Overall, I'm feeling another high A tier. Season 1, Episode 3. Denial, Anger, Acceptance.
Got myself a gun. Got myself a gun. Got my...
Brendan and Chris return the truck back to its rightful owners, as Brendan starts complaining that he just gave out the biggest score of his life on the ride home. Mikey tells Junior that the truck made it back home safely, and that the owner said thank you to Tony, which pisses off Junior. He starts going, "What the fuck? Those assholes thank Tony? I'll slit their throats!" And then Mikey's like, "Yeah, fuck Chris! You should kill that guy!" And then Junior's like, "Hey, whoa, take it easy." Tony waits in Melfi's office as a painting of a barn catches his eye, and he inspects it closer, looking at the barn's entrance. Melfi asks what the fuck is wrong with him, and the two begin their meeting, with Tony asking what's the deal with the painting. While Melfi says that it's just some random painting she bought somewhere, Tony sees the painting as an insult to his intelligence, and that the painting is intentionally trying to depress him. Yet another example of Tony shifting his feelings onto something completely unrelated. Tony tells Melfi about Jackie's cancer, but that he's sure that Jackie will make a quick recovery. Later, Tony visits Jackie in the hospital along with the rest of the boys, and wastes no time insulting Mikey after noticing him in the room.
Hey, Mikey, nice to see you again in men's clothing.
Hey, you know, I think I should grab a fire extinguisher. Heard a friend of yours had a spontaneous combustion in his restaurant.
Mikey quickly leaves the room after his joke bombed, and Silvio tells Tony about a Jewish guy that they have to deal with, and how his son-in-law won't let his daughter get a divorce unless the guy gives him 50% of his motel. Paulie asks why doesn't the guy just kill his son-in-law, but Silvio says it's taboo for their religion, implying that it's fine everywhere else. Which it is. Meadow goes la 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 in choir class and the teacher acts like a dick to her. Meadow and Hunter complain about how their recital is the same day as their SATs. And Meadow talks about how she wants to go to Berkeley so she doesn't have to deal with her mom and dad anymore. Meanwhile, her mom and dad help Artie, Bucco, and Charmaine with their new house. And Artie tells Tony that he still hasn't gotten the insurance money yet, as the company is doing a second arson investigation on the restaurant.
It doesn't make any sense. Who would burn down a perfectly good restaurant?
Ooh, I know! Tony Soprano! Two Jewish guys have a sit-down with Tony, who complains about the son-in-law who wants 50% of the motel. Tony says that he'll get the son-in-law to divorce without compensation as long as the guy gives 25% of the business to Tony, which he agrees to. Silvio and Paulie later head to the motel, and confront the son-in-law, Ariel, who turns out to be a big pain in the ass and refuses to hand over the motel easily. Silvio and Paulie prove themselves to be even bigger pains in the ass, as they beat the shit out of Ariel until he agrees.
Say bupkis, Paulie. What? That's how they say nothing. Fuck that. This is how I say nothing.
Carm decides to cheer up Charmaine and Artie Bucco by having them cater at a fundraiser at their house, and Tony whines like a baby about it. Meadow blasts music in her room as Carm asks about how the restaurant could have burned down in the first place, and Tony tells her to shut up about it since he started it.
Do you think it could have been arson?
What's the matter with you?
Carm and Hunter are having a hard time studying for their tests, so they come up with the great idea of buying meth. They hit up Chris's place and ask if they can get some. And Christopher says fuck no because Meadow is his cousin. And also because Tony would skull fuck him with a monkey wrench if he did so. Brendan does what any responsible adult would do and hits on these underage girls as they walk out the door. Tony visits Jackie again, and gives Jackie a gift in the form of this nurse who's ready to play Battleship with him. And Tony later recounts the story to Melfi, telling her about how fucking awesome it was. Tony asks for Melfi's opinion on Jackie's condition, telling her that they aren't able to remove a recurred tumor due to it being next to a vital organ. And while Melfi says that it doesn't sound good, Tony tells her to fuck off and that she doesn't know anything. He says that Jackie's taken 3 weeks worth of chemo and still has every last bit of hair on his head, meaning that he's totally fine. And Melfi explains how Tony's rationalization of his feelings will act as the key to finding out his true feelings.
The tree in the painting, write it out, you said? There's nothing in that picture to indicate that.
The fucking painting. I knew that was a fucking scam. I knew that painting was a fucking scam.
You remember your dream? The ducks? It took on another meaning. What happens to a tree that's rotted out?
Trees, ducks, what the fuck are you, Ranger Rick? I'll tell you, some job you shrinks got, you think everybody's lying to you while you're pulling scams on them. Fuck you!
Chris decides that getting skull-fucked by Tony with a monkey wrench actually doesn't sound too bad, as he decides to give a 10th to Meadow, under the rationale that he doesn't want Meadow to pick up some poison drugs on the street, as if snorting meth on its own is good for you. Which it is. Artie complains about Tony making more money than him as we transition over to the fundraiser, where Carmela accidentally offends Charmaine by calling her over the same way that she does with her servants at home. Ariel still won't accept the offer, so Paulie and Silvio force the guy into the trunk. And we cleanly transition back to the party, where Artie complains about his dumb burnt down restaurant for the millionth time. Tony, still feeling pretty guilty, tells Artie to shut the fuck up, and Artie slaps some meat across Tony's face. And they luckily start a dumb food fight before the argument actually gets real. Ariel gets his asshole reamed in the back of the pork store, and he explains why he's being such a dick, saying that he deserves to be paid for the years he's worked at the motel. But Paulie and Silvio disagree and wrestle him to the ground. They call Tony as he's about to play an eventful game of Battleship that this guy is not going down without a fight, and Tony sadly complies. Tony's blue balls start to get to him immediately, as he notices yet another painting on the wall that rubs him the wrong way, and he heads down to the pork store to cook up some fresh meat. Tony says that he promised that he wasn't gonna kill Ariel, but that he's willing to change his mind this one time. Ariel says that he's willing to die either way, as he believes that his death will bring great spiritual harm to the hotel owner's family and friends. Tony calls resident Jewish dude Hesh, who tells Tony I told you so about not dealing with this issue, and reminds Tony of another solution for him to use to get him out of this pickle.
I know one thing that no man wants to go through life without.
What? Oh. That's a fucking brilliant idea. Ariel, we're going to plan B.
Charmaine is still pissed about getting called over like a servant gate, so she decides to up the ante by admitting to Carmela that she slept with Tony once. Awkward!
Beat Race is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
The Jewish guy is upset with Tony, since the only way Tony was able to get him to agree to the deal was by threatening to chop his balls off, and admits to Tony that he gave Ariel 15% out of courtesy. Tony pins the guy up to the wall and tells him to give him the 25% either way, and the guy gets really angry at Tony, saying that he's created a monster, which is something that you really shouldn't be that surprised by when you're working with the fucking mafia. Tony meets Jackie in the hospital again, who is looking a lot worse for wear. Tony tries to tell Jackie the funny story of how he tried to cut Ariel's dick off, but Jackie's too distracted by the fact that he's sick and stuff. Chris is still living in Junior's head rent-free, who thinks that Chris and Brendan are fucking with him intentionally and getting away scot-free by hiding behind Tony. Livia's like, please don't kill Chris, he's like a son to me, as if she already doesn't have a son. But Junior still wants to take some sort of action. Livia, in a moment of uncharacteristic clarity, says that Chris should be given a talking to while Brendan should be taken care of accordingly.
You got a lot of sense for an old gal.
No. I'm a babbling idiot.
Yes. Tony talks about how sad he feels about Jackie and his cancer, and how his distraction with the cancer and his symptoms makes it feel like he's already gone. Tony talks about the Jewish guys he had to deal with, and their strong beliefs and unwillingness to retreat when faced with death. Tony admits that, while he isn't afraid of death as long as it's for an honorable cause, watching the once strong Jackie Aprile wither away in front of him in a hospital bed deeply unnerved him. He also tells Melfi about the guy insulting Tony by calling him Frankenstein, and Melfi asks Tony if he feels like Frankenstein himself, or rather, a thing that lacks empathy and emotion. We get this great ending scene with Carm and Tony attending Meadow's choir concert, as Chris gets the shit beaten out of him by Junior's men, whom Chris mistakenly believes to be sent by Tony as he confesses that he gave some crystal to Meadow and Hunter. As Meadow and Hunter sing with beads of sweat on their forehead methodically, Brendan gets shot in his bathtub and dies. This whole scene draws a lot of parallels and inspiration from the ending scene of The Godfather, where a ton of violent shit happens as something peaceful happens simultaneously. Meadow and Hunter belt out one last harmony as the episode draws to a close. This was a solid episode all around. I thought the Artie Bucco fundraiser subplot was kind of boring, but everything else in this episode was pretty great. I'm feeling a high beats here for this episode. Season 1, Episode 4, Meadowlands.
Hey, it's like that one character!
We open on another meeting with Melfi, as Tony waits for Melfi to start the meeting. All of a sudden, Tony notices that Hesh is walking right by the window in the best green screen effect ever put to film.
A friend of mine just walked right by.
Has she? He has at 3 o'clock.
Tony walks out of the room as he notices AJ staring at him through a random crevice in the office, and opens the door to the waiting room, where he runs into Silvio playing a game of Battleship. He gives Tony the iconic Silvio wink as Paulie gives Tony one of the best reaction gifts ever created. Tony asks Melfi what the hell's going on, as Jackie wakes up from his hospital bed with a cigarette in his hand, telling Tony about a thunderstorm that's brewing. Tony demands to see Melfi's face, and she turns around, revealing it to be Livia in a wig. This entire scene seems super weird, I just can't seem to put my finger on it. Oh, I know! Paulie's reading out of a Chinese newspaper! This guy's a fucking fraud! He speaks American! As you could probably guess, Tony had a nightmare, and his Russian Gumar tells him to shut up so she can sleep. These dream sequences are going to be popping up every once in a while in this series, and in my humble opinion, they are some of my absolute favorite parts of this entire show. Not only do we get a deeper glimpse into Tony's psyche, but these glimpses are also some of the absolute best portrayals of dreams I've ever seen in a TV show. The dream sequences in The Sopranos capture the feeling of dreams so accurately, with characters showing up out of nowhere in random settings and places that show up but are never elaborated on or acknowledged, and with weird bits of dialogue that string along to create a barely cohesive conversation. Dreams can sometimes feel like your subconscious is trying to tell you something, and The Sopranos also captures that brilliantly as well. Despite all this accuracy and psyche exploration and whatnot though, that's not even my favorite part. My favorite part of these sequences are just how fucking weird they can get. Just like with dreams in real life, these sequences can get absolutely nuts, and you can tell that the writers had a blast trying to figure out what to put in Tony's dreams. It really makes you forget that this was one of the most popular TV shows in the country with how weird it gets, because it can sometimes feel like you're watching some strange art piece that you'd watch at a museum. Simply put, I love these sequences a lot, and I'll be praising every single one of them accordingly throughout this series. But before I get way too ahead of myself, let's stick to the present and analyze this specific dream sequence. As I stated before, getting therapy as a mafia member is a big fat no-no in the mob. What with the whole client confidentiality thing and reporting to the police. Part of Tony's stress is dealing with the fact that if someone found out that he was seeing a therapist, he would get his ass absolutely beaten. And I believe that this particular sequence represents the paranoia that he feels about everyone finding out about this. In real life, dreams are used to process emotions and memories that we experienced the day before, which is often why we see elements in our dreams that feature settings and people that we had previously experienced. Hesh being the catalyst to Tony finding everyone in the office calls back to the previous episode, with Hesh being a somewhat key figure in the episode and dealing with a Jewish guy. And Silvio playing Battleship with a stripper calls back to Tony hiring a stripper to have a grand old time with Jackie. I have no idea why that fucking newspaper's in Chinese, though. Tony's subconscious also tells Tony that something bad's about to happen to Jackie, and hints to Tony that the people in the mafia finding out about his therapy visits may be caused by his mother finding out and leaking the deets, explaining Livia being in the wig. Jackie saying this also might be a subconscious hinting that Jackie's going to pass away soon, but that would never happen. Come on, what does he have, cancer or something? Get real. These are just my personal interpretations of the scene, though. For all I know, David Chase might have just added Silvio banging the stripper because he thought it'd be funny. Anyways, Tony goes home as he runs into AJ playing Mario Kart. He decides to have a bonding moment with his son and plays a game with him, but he sucks ass at it and embarrasses himself. He tries to ask AJ how his day was and what happened at school, but AJ is too locked in to respond. AJ kicks Tony's ass and tells him to lock in. And Tony proves himself to be one of the greatest Mario Kart speedrunners of all time, distracting AJ by putting his hand in his face. A strategy that will surely end him up in a future summoning Salt video.
Come on, stop.
Kicking your ass now. One-handed. Look at that. You lose.
Christopher's recovering from shitting his pants at the hospital. He's incredibly paranoid that either Tony or one of his men are going to Five Nights at Freddy's jump scare him. And while Adriana says that there's nothing to worry about, Chris argues with her that there is.
What? What?
Nothing.
What?
You don't want to know, okay? Trust me.
What?
Nothing.
What?
You don't want to know, okay?
What?
Trust me.
What?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing.
What? 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 What?
I heard the nurse say you made.
What?
I heard the nurse say you made number 2 in your pants.
What?
Chris and Adriana head home to the horrible realization that Brendan also made number 2 in his pants, while AJ prank calls a kid at school, which results in AJ and the kid getting into a fight. Tony's fears about getting caught going to Melfi's are almost realized, as he nearly runs into Silvio getting a dental checkup. He doesn't get Silvio's iconic wink, but he does get to tell Melfi about his insecurities about going to therapy, and how unsafe he feels knowing that one slip-up could incriminate him. Adriana picks up Meadow from school and brings her to her car, and she gets Five Nights at Freddy's jump scared by Chris, who yells at her and accuses her of telling Tony about the meth. Meadow yells back that she didn't, and that Tony has been asking about Chris worried about where he is. And Chris apologizes for being crazy. Meadow proclaims that she hates her life as a soprano, and Chris tells her to never hate life, and comes up with a great solution to make her feel better.
Remember like when you were little? I'll buy you one of those Happy Meals, all right?
Where the fuck are you?
AJ pulls a Walter White as he attempts to kill a fly in his room, and Carm asks why the fuck his fly t-shirt was in the garbage, which causes AJ to admit that he got in a fight. Carm says that she's going to call the kid's mom, and AJ tells her not to, offering to clean the family car in order to pay off the shirt. Tony lovingly gives Livia some macaroons, and Livia brushes them off because she's the spawn of Satan. You can literally see her get happy, remember it's from Tony, and then start hating again. This woman just hates her son. We need to kill her. Tony tells Livia about a field trip to New York City she could go to, but Livia says no again because she hates everything. Tony rightfully tells Livia that she can't just put all of her problems on him, telling her that she could be happy at the retirement home if she wanted to, but is instead acting like a dumb baby about it. Livia acts like a dumb baby about it, and Tony leaves the retirement home, gracefully placing some macaroons out for some of the other old folks that would actually appreciate it, and not act like an asshole. You Tony meets up with this detective guy, whom Tony has hired to follow and take pictures of Dr. Melfi. Why, you might ask? Well, shockingly, it's not because Tony is suspicious that she'll rat him out to the government. Rather, it's because Tony has feelings for her? Yeah, that's right. As foreshadowed in Tony's dream with the camera suspiciously slowly panning over her legs, Tony has started to develop a crush on Melfi. So he handles these feelings the way any normal person would by stalking her. While this detective goes out stalking some random lady, Tony goes out to meet Jackie Aprile, who's looking even worse than the last time we saw him. Chris musters up some courage and meets Tony in the hospital, and tells Tony that Brendan is dead in his bathtub, which Tony immediately deduces to be from Uncle Junior while Paulie and Pussy argue about some dumb shit. Chris leaves the hospital, thirsty for a can of sweet revenge. And while Tony tells Chris that he shouldn't since Mikey Palmisi is a made guy, Chris tells Tony that Junior is openly pissing on their heads. But Tony says that he doesn't care and tells Paulie to grab Chris's dick and twist it if he leaves.
Oh my god, dude, it's an MMA fight, dude.
Shut up! While Tony seems like he wants to keep things calm and collected, in reality, he is fucking pissed. And his eye catches a staple gun from a dude working on construction, which he uses to confront dear old Mikey Palmisi in his car.
Mr. Spot. This is overdue.
Tony walks into the coffee shop and confronts Junior, saying that he wants to keep things calm because he respects him. But Junior claims to see right through Tony, saying that Tony doesn't respect his mother because he threw her in an asylum. Yet another instance of Livia's manipulation. Junior still feels as if Chris and Brendan weren't punished enough for their crimes, but Tony says that it's none of his business, telling Junior that he runs his crew his own way and that Junior's actions went over the line.
I answer to bigger people than you, my friend.
Oh? Like Jackie? Want to take this to his deathbed?
Junior enforces his power as boss by taking Chris away from Tony, saying that he might give Tony shit for a change instead of him. And while Tony criticizes Junior for his actions, Junior still kicks him out of the restaurant. By the looks of Tony's sweaty brow, it's pretty clear that war is about to go underway, and he knows it. Hey, look, ocean sea view. I wonder if we'll get an establishing shot of a body of water. Yep, I'm a genius. To fall in love. We watch the detective spy on Melfi, who's out on a date with this dude, and he pretends to be a cop in order to pull Melfi and her date over. The detective, mistakenly believing Melfi to be cheating on Tony Soprano with another man, starts acting like a massive asshole to this dude, forcing him out of the car and beating the shit out of him. When Melfi tells him to stop being a meanie head, the detective chastises her, asking why she's going out for hamburgers when there's prime rib at home. The detective tells Tony about Melfi's schedule, and Tony treats the guy accordingly by mocking his gambling skills and leaving. Tony and his men make fun of Mikey as they eat lobster, and they discuss Junior's stubborn nature and whether or not they'll actually go to war. Tony says that none of this would have happened if Jackie didn't get sick, and that one of the captains is gonna have to step up and prevent shit from hitting the fan. Tony tries to pass the step-upping onto Raymond, but he, along with the rest of the boys, tell Tony that he's gonna have to duke it out with Junior, as he's more than capable of the job and has been the golden boy since day one, which Tony is nervous about since he still loves and respects his uncle.
Not for anything, God bless your uncle. But he's living in the wrong century, and New York knows it.
It's the right thing. It's inevitable.
I don't want no disturbance.
While Tony's conflict with Junior is heating up, AJ's conflict with his friend is also heating up. as AJ's lazy ass demands that his friend give him $40 for the shirt. And the boys quickly resolve the conflict by beating each other up again. A bunch of kids separate the boys, however, and AJ's friend tells them to meet up somewhere else so they can fight for real. Meanwhile, Tony runs into AJ's friend's dad, who mistakenly believes that Tony's gonna kill him with an axe due to AJ's fight with his son, as Tony's like, "Hey, let's cook up some hot dogs, Mamma Mia and stuff," and then the dad runs away. Tony has a panic attack in the kitchen and dies, but luckily Carm gets him his reboot card in time. Tony's feelings for Melfi are starting to get the best of him, as Tony tells Carm that he's gonna quit therapy. But Carm, still not knowing that the therapist is a she and not a he, talks him out of this, saying that she thinks the therapy is helping him out tremendously, but understands that he's under a lot of pressure due to Jackie's sickness. While Tony says that she doesn't understand, Carm argues back, saying that the therapy will be extremely important for their marriage, and that if he quits, she's going to reevaluate things. Tony and Melfi talk about Tony's recent panic attack, who says that nothing long-term has occurred. Melfi prescribes Tony some Xanax, and Tony tells Melfi about Uncle Junior forcing him into a bad spot, as well as Livia being an asshole as usual. Tony draws a comparison to dealing with two bratty children, and Melfi suggests letting them act as they usually do, and give them the illusion of control while secretly being the main one in charge, unintentionally giving Tony a great idea to deal with Junior. Chris finds out that Junior's boys stole his drug money, so he chokes an associate of his for letting them take it from him. Meanwhile, AJ prepares for his fight with his friend, but his friend ends up just giving AJ the $40 anyway, ending the conflict peacefully. Tony takes some Xanax on the Bing, and finds out while watching the news that Jackie Aprile died in the hospital, which causes Tony to break down into tears. The boys get together and toast to Jackie Aprile, and this beautiful moment of silence is quickly interrupted by Chris yelling, "Junior took all my monies!" completely unable to read the room like it's printed in hieroglyphs. Tony tells Chris that now's not the time, but Chris continues babbling on and on about how he can't get his monies and his reputation's ruined, and makes the extremely poor decision of saying that, if they don't get shit squared away, he's going to start questioning Tony's leadership.
You ungrateful little fuck. Where'd you get the balls to question my leadership, huh?
You're the boss.
That's right. I am. And you're lucky a man I love died today.
It's crazy just how powerful Tony Soprano's portrayed in the show, and especially this scene. The way he's grabbing Chris's head, it really feels like he's going to just crush his shit like a walnut. Pussy and the rest of the Pussinators proclaim this to be the start of the war with Tony and Junior, and we cut to Tony heading to the coffee shop, not before cocking a handgun before walking in. Tony talks with Junior, and makes the surprising decision to hand over the new position as head captain to him, taking Melfi's advice and running with it. Junior nervously looks up and down before Tony confirms the choice, and the two hug it out, completely and totally ending the conflict with nothing bad happening ever again.
What do you think, I'm gonna mess with a guy like you? Huh? What, have you been pumping iron? Look at you, strong as a bull.
Before going through, Tony asks to gain ownership of part of Junior's business, which Junior agrees to. AJ walks into Meadow's room, telling her about his friend backing out of the fight, along with one of his friend's sarcastic comments saying that everyone's real scared of AJ. AJ asks Meadow what all this means, and Meadow shows AJ a website, which redirects to the Beat Rise YouTube channel! Like, comment, subscribe, and ring that little bell, and I may just fuck your wife! No, the real website Meadow shows AJ is a website featuring a variety of members of the mob, with a bunch of sound effects that go bing bong boink. Melfi visits her date at his house, who reveals to her that he's been suffering from trauma after the whole ordeal. AJ stares at the printed photos of the mob website, and stares at a picture of him and his dad fishing as he goes to bed, untrusting of his father. Tony goes to another meeting with Melfi, but Melfi is absolutely exhausted, having been preoccupied with her date getting beat up by the detective the night before. She describes herself as out of touch with the casual violence of American culture, telling Tony about the situation with her date, which pisses Tony off considerably. She tells Tony that he's filing suit and that her relationship with him will never be the same, but regains composure and asks Tony how the Xanax is working, which Tony says it is. We cut to Jackie Aprile's funeral, which is occupied by the one and only Fucklin, as Silvio asks Tony why the Fucklin he made Junior boss. Tony says that Junior's finally happy now, and reassures that he'll still be making moves behind Junior's back. They also point out how Junior will act as the new target for the police to keep all their eyes on, and they throw dirt onto Jackie's coffin to pay their respects. Chris points out the government taking photos of the funeral to Tony as AJ watches from afar, and Meadow gives AJ a look that screams, "I told you so." Tony notices AJ staring, and gives him a wink, ending the episode. Man, I forgot about how many great episodes there were in Season 1. This was yet another great episode, with some really entertaining developments on both sides of the show. We really start to see the mob side and family side of Tony's life start to blend in with each other in a way that Tony hasn't even realized yet, as well as how his actions unintentionally affect the lives of those around him. You know, aside from the obvious killing people stuff. I also love Chris constantly trying to get on Tony's good side, only to get screwed over by Junior and proceed to make a complete ass out of himself with a bing. We also get introduced to the dream sequences in the show, which you already know are some of my favorite aspects of The Sopranos. We also get some pretty iconic scenes from this episode, like Christopher leaving the hospital with the massive fucking dog cone around his neck, as well as Tony getting himself onto a Carl Jobst video. I can't lie, I'm feeling a light S tier on this episode. Congratulations, Meadowlands. You beat college to the punch for the first S tier on the list. Hey, speaking of which, Season 1, Episode 5, College.
Got myself a gun. Got myself a gun. Got myself a gun.
We open up with Tony and Meadow on a college visit, where Meadow starts asking Tony some suspiciously mafia-related questions. Like, why did Tony barely attend college when he was younger, and why were his parents so anti-education? Tony brushes off these questions, saying that he only got into an itty-bitty bit of trouble when he was younger. And when Tony and Meadow drive off to another college visit, Meadow cuts the bullshit and asks Tony point blank,
Are you in the mafia?
Am I in the what?
Whatever you want to call it. Organized crime.
I'm in the waste management business. Everybody immediately assumes you're mobbed up. It's a stereotype, and it's offensive.
After this, Tony would never stereotype another race again for the rest of the show. Tony is obviously very taken aback by this question, and while he initially goes as far as to deny a mafia even existing, he folds a little bit for Meadow, claiming that some of his money comes from illegal gambling. While he tries to argue that some of his money comes from legit business work, Meadow tells him to quit yapping and turns the radio back on. This is probably one of the more famous scenes in The Sopranos, and for good reason. Most TV shows at the time, hell, even now, would have the main character keep up this double life shtick until like the last few seasons or even episodes of the show. But The Sopranos is like, fuck that. Let's have the main character get confronted in the first few episodes of the show, which I'm almost certain left a pretty big impact on viewers at home. Even I was a little like, wait, what the fuck? On my first viewing. And I wasn't even born until the last season of the show aired. This scene also depicts one of the best aspects that this show is most well known for, and that's its incredible writing. I don't know what it is about this show's writing, but the pacing and flow of it always feels so natural yet so quick at the same time. Like, there's never a scene in The Sopranos where you feel like it's being bogged down by unnecessary information or that it clumsily gets its idea across. It always feels mature and sophisticated, despite the increasingly graphic subject matter that I'll be covering as the show progresses. Hell, even the swearing feels intentional. Despite the show airing in an age where being edgy was becoming the new norm and rebelling against the system was cool as fuck, the show never comes across as the writers trying to be like, look at us, we can say fuck on our show and we can show massive boobs! Instead, it always feels like an honest portrayal from the writers, and not as some sort of contest to see who can be as edgy as possible, which is something that I think even shows that I really enjoy suffer with. Tony calls up his Russian Gumar, who complains about her cousin Svetlana having the flu and wanting to get married in America despite it being like 2 months since they got there. She complains about her cousin for like 20 minutes and Tony hangs up because she's annoying. He calls Carm, who also has the flu, and she asks Tony how everything's going and hoping that Meadow doesn't want to go to Berkeley anymore. However, Tony is preoccupied with some dude wiping down his car, and he tells Carm that he'll call her back. The guy notices Tony looking at him and quickly rushes the fuck out of there, and Tony quickly rushes the fuck out of there as well, telling Meadow to hurry up and get in.
Fucking maniac! What's going on?
Just fooling around.
Dad, slow down!
Just fooling around.
Meadow keeps complaining to Tony that they're missing all the turns to the college, and Tony swerves into their motel, saying to Meadow that it wasn't who he thought it was. Tony quickly calls Chris, telling him to write down the plate numbers, as AJ serves Carm a horrible breakfast, and Carm tells him to get out of the house because it sucks. Chris calls Tony in the pouring rain, who tells Chris that he may have just spotted a man by the name of Febby Petrulio, a guy who ratted out a big part of Tony's crew after getting busted for peddling heroin. He gives Chris the numbers as Meadow asks why he's not using the phone in their hotel room, and Tony says that he's just fooling around. Back at home, Carm brushes her hair for 3 hours as she invites Father Phil and Tintola into the house, where they talk about wine and cheese and stuff. Tony stares at Meadow at a restaurant, talking about how proud he is of her. Meadow suspects that Tony's up to something, not sure how she got that idea.
Fucking maniac!
Just fooling around.
And Tony asks how it's sitting with her and if AJ knew already. Tony proclaims that he wasn't left with many options in life, and talks about how he didn't have much interest in college, except for history class, which makes a lot of sense considering his later justification for his actions by bringing up other famous Italian figures in history. Meadow, figuring that Tony is being honest with her, decides to be honest with Tony and confesses that she took speed to keep up with homework, which initially pisses off Tony. However, he calms down pretty quickly upon learning that Meadow wanted to be honest with Tony after Tony's confession, and the two managed to make up and strengthen their bond together. sort of. Carm and Father Phil talk about fires and Buddhism and stuff. And Tony lets Meadow hang out with a bunch of girls from Colby College, which gives Tony some time to deal with Febby the rat. He gets the address from Chris, and tells him to call Paulie or Pussy in case they need to deal with this guy. And while Chris complains for the 80th time about how it's not him, Tony tells him to shut up. Carm and Phil talk about food and Yonkers and stuff. And Carm answers a call from Dr. Melfi, who asks Carm to tell Tony that she needs to reschedule an appointment because of the flu. What the fuck? Why is everyone sick? Oh yeah, it's raining. Carm, realizing that the therapist wasn't actually a he after all, belligerently ends the call, and asks Father Phil why Tony feels like he has to lie constantly. Oh, I don't know, Carm, maybe it's because you always assume he's cheating on you? Oh yeah, he does. Father Phil tries to comfort Carm as Tony IDs Febby, who helps put his daughter to bed. The family dog spots Tony and starts barking like crazy, and Febby runs out the door, realizing that someone might be on his ass. Phil and Carm talk about how Jesus only had 2 hours worth of talking in the entire New Testament, and how God is able to forgive even the worst people on earth because of his love. A concept that Carm finds very difficult to accept, which will become apparent here very soon. The sexual tension between Carm and Phil becomes thicker and thicker as Carm convinces him to stay over at the house for just a while longer. And we transition to church bells ringing as Tony walks down the street smoking a fat ciggy. Febby starts nervously asking people around the place if anyone's looking for him, with his gun sitting in the passenger seat. Or as my dumbass would say, his shotgun riding shotgun. Tony starts looking through the white pages to track Febby's car down, as Febby asks the bartender of the place that Meadow was getting drunk off her ass at if anyone's looking for him, which he says there totally isn't as Tony looks for him. He spots down the business and looks inside the office, where he finds a bust of Ronald Reagan sitting on a desk.
Hello, Rat.
Febby nervously looks at a list of guest names as Carm and Phil watch a sad movie together titled The Remains of the Day, which features two characters that almost marry one another, but eventually decide not to, due to one of the characters' jobs being incompatible with their marriage and the other characters already being married. Huh. I wonder what that reminds me of. Carm tells Phil to turn off the movie because she can't handle these strong emotions, and Phil offers Carm to have her give a confession while glancing up and down at her lips. The two turn their backs to each other as Carm gives an incredibly emotional confession to Phil, describing the overwhelming guilt she's felt for sacrificing her morals in exchange for wealth and a better life for herself and her children. Without explicitly saying he's in the mafia, she describes her shame in allowing and excusing Tony's actions in exchange for this better life, and says that she believes he's done terrible things. As she says that she believes that God will one day punish her for her sins, we cut to Febby loading his gun, implying that this punishment may be coming soon as he pulls into the motel parking lot. Tony helps Meadow drag her drunk ass into the motel room as Febby nearly assassinates Tony on the spot, but he pussies out due to an elderly couple standing nearby. Come on, Febby, they would have loved it! You were just fooling around!
Just fooling around.
Speaking of fooling around, Carm finishes confessing to Father Phil, who suggests that she take communion, which is performed in an extremely suggestive and sensual manner, at least according to these camera angles. Holy fucking sweat, look at this guy's forehead! Phil nervously drinks the rest of the wine as the two finish communion. Hey, kitty. And they hug it out as the rain continues to pour. Alright, fine, you can get a segment. Oh my god! What are you doing? Alright, I gotta... Ah, no! I just spilled a bunch of vitamin water. Tony calls Chris, and Chris is like, okay, I got some sweet plane tickets to Boston. Now's my chance to finally become a made guy. And then Tony says no and hangs up. Tony calls Carm, telling her that he's gonna be sleeping over for the night, which makes Phil excited, except... It was actually Anthony Jr., who's still embarrassed about him epic failing at breakfast this morning. As it seems like the two are about to kiss, Father Phil starts yakking all over the place, revealing that he just got massive cooties from Carm's sickness. She nearly calls Tony, but she hangs up right after he answers the phone, and she reflects on the evening as the storm continues on. Febby continues to spy on Tony as he exits the motel with Meadow, and Tony and Meadow fool around as Febby wipes his forehead, relieved. Tony drops Meadow's hungover ass at another college, as he rushes off to kill someone. Grab some food. Father Phil wakes up the next morning from the couch, who apologizes for nearly fucking Carm the night before. Phil realizes that he left his car out in plain sight the entire night, but Carm insists that they did nothing wrong, sarcastically asking if there's a commandment against eating ziti. AJ arrives back home, and Phil and Carm say goodbye to one another.
So what, no fucking ZD now?
Febby tries to force two druggies into killing Tony on the street, saying that he'll never give the two a bag ever again if they don't do what he asks. They don't do what he asks. He tries to call up more volunteers for the Murder Tony Club, until he hears rustling outside of the building. Febby grabs his gun and silently treads around, attempting to find whatever he heard in the bushes. He hears another rustle to his left, and as he looks around, he spots a deer in the woods, mistakenly believing it to be the culprit. It wasn't a deer that was making the noise, however. It was another animal entirely.
Good morning, rat.
In this brutal scene, Tony chastises Febby for ratting them out all those years ago, and violently strangles him until Febby is completely suffocated. As Tony wipes the blood off of his hands, he hears a family of ducks flying away together in the sky, representing the growing rift that the mafia life is creating between Tony and his family, as Tony stares into the sky, completely stunned. Tony picks up Meadow from the college, and as Tony drives off, Meadow notices a bunch of dirt on his shoes, as well as his bleeding hand. Tony creates a ton of lies about using the back door of the restaurant trying to find his watch and cutting his hand on the screen door. And when Meadow suggests that Tony went to fight the man that he mentioned, saying that she noticed him using the payphone at 1 in the morning, Tony gaslights her, saying that she can't be trusted due to the alcohol that she was drinking.
Dad, you're being honest with me, right? We have that kind of relationship, you said.
That's right. We do or we don't. Takes two to tango.
Dad.
What?
Nothing.
Despite Meadow and Tony bonding with one another over their promises of honesty, Tony's constant lies about the extent of his mafia activities causes them to regress back to square one, as portrayed by the family of ducks flying away. The two eventually head to a college, where Meadow speaks with a dean about being accepted, and Tony reads a quote on the wall that hits close to home for him.
No man can wear one face to himself, and another to the multitude, without finally getting bewildered as to which may be true.
Thanks, Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, cool, whatever. Where's my money, douchebag?
It's a quote that sums up Tony's double life pretty succinctly, essentially telling Tony that he can't go his entire life playing two sides of his life without both of them inevitably bleeding into one another.
I said, where's my money, douchebag?
Tony goes scurry into the driveway, as Carm congratulates Meadow on her decision. Tony sees that there's no fucking ZD now, and Carm says that it got eaten by her and Father Phil, saying that he spent the night. Tony's like, wow, real cool, Carm. I can't believe you cheat on me like that. Tony keeps making remarks about Phil and Carm's supposed affair, and the two argue and bicker for a few minutes before Carm drops a bombshell on Tony.
Oh, by the way, your therapist called. Jennifer?
Carm calls out Tony's hypocrisy as Tony tries to make her feel better, ending the episode. What an incredible episode. If you've heard anything about this show in the last few years, it's probably from a bunch of critics and blogs talking about how this is supposedly the greatest episode of television that has ever been made, ever created, ever. And while I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, what I can agree on is that it's a fantastic piece of TV history. Many people call College one of the most important pieces of television ever created, not only in terms of the way it progresses the story of the show, but also in the way that it broke many molds and boundaries that TV hadn't reached up to this point. HBO was initially hesitant to even air this episode, as, up to this point, never had a character, much less the main character of the show, murdered someone in cold blood and got away with it. HBO feared that this would make Tony Soprano completely irredeemable to the viewers at home, and would turn off many audience members to the show entirely, which would be especially harmful considering that this is only the 5th episode of the show. But the showrunners decided to take that risk anyways, and thus, television as a medium was changed forever. Again, while I don't agree that this is the best episode of the show, it is still pretty amazing, and essentially acts as a sort of microcosm of everything that makes The Sopranos, The Sopranos. Family life, mafia life, lies, deceit, cheating, sex, kind of, murder, the works. The Meadow and Tony scenes are absolutely incredible, and is easily one of the best Meadow-related plots at any point in the show. I love how her relationship with Tony evolves and then devolves throughout the course of the episode as she sees right through her dad's lies, without it feeling like the audience's time was wasted. I wasn't initially a fan of the Phil and Carm scenes on first watch, but I've really started to appreciate them on second watch, mainly because of Edie Falco's absolutely terrific acting. She won an Emmy for this episode, and to be completely honest, I am not at all surprised. She displayed such a vast array of emotions throughout this entire episode, without it ever feeling unnatural or forced. In fact, this whole episode flows so seamlessly throughout both plots. I love the cat and mouse game between Febby and Tony, more like the cat and rat game. Tet and how we go back and forth from Tony's perspective to Febby's perspective, until both characters eventually clash together in one of the most impactful scenes of the whole show. I also love the complex relationship that Tony and Carm have with cheating on each other. Tony cheats on Carm constantly, but not in the way that Carm assumes like with Melfi. But you can't really be on Carm's side either, because these assumptions nearly led to her playing kissy-kissy with Dr. Phil. But you also obviously can't be on Tony's side either, because while he isn't technically having an affair with Melfi, he's been having some pretty suspicious thoughts lately. But you can't side with Carm because said affair hasn't technically happened yet. It's a spider web of lies, lies, and more lies. And it's incredibly engaging to follow. To the surprise of a grand total of no one, this episode is getting an S tier. A brilliant episode from beginning to end. Season 1, Episode 6, Pax Soprana.
Just fooling around.
Ben, slow down!
Professional date ruiner Detective Vin meets Tony at the construction site, where he gives Tony another update on Dr. Melfi's day-to-day life. Tony criticizes him for beating the shit out of her date last month, and the detective tells Tony that they aren't seeing each other anymore. Tony gives him $2 and leaves. Tony goes to his next meeting with Melfi, where he gets the 2 cups of coffee as Tony talks about how pissed Carmela is at her. Tony says that she spilled the beans about her true gender due to recalling the household last episode, and she asks Tony why specifically he wanted a female doctor.
What's the one thing every woman, your mother, your wife, your daughter have in common?
They all break my balls. No, I know what you mean. They're all Italian, so what?
So, maybe by coming clean with me, you're dialoguing with them.
Tony reverses the question onto Melfi, asking why Melfi has Tony as a patient despite him having a suspiciously mafia-like presence, which Melfi doesn't answer. We transition to a card game protected by Jimmy Altieri, and Mikey walks through the door and starts beating the shit out of the leader, declaring that Junior is the new boss around here and that he doesn't respect these arrangements. Junior, all confident and full of piss and vinegar, gets himself fitted into a brand new suit. He asks the designer about his son, and he tells Junior about how his son died due to drugs. Junior, the shining role model he is, talks about how drugs are super bad and stuff. But the designer tells Junior that he killed himself, which makes the atmosphere of the room even sadder. Mikey ruins everything by describing a similar sounding death he heard about in graphic detail, and Junior tells him to shut the fuck up. The designer's like, man, if I ever found out who was selling those drugs, I'm gonna have him killed. As Junior's like, yeah, you tell him, as he stands there awkwardly half naked. Livia gives a pair of fuck me eyes to Junior as this old dude walks by.
Morning.
Yeah, hi.
New arrival?
Go ahead, keep moving, fella.
I swear, old people shit-talking old people will never not be funny to me. Hey, how are you doing today? Hey, shut up, old man! Oh, my back! Livia congratulates Junior on his new promotion and warns him not to let people take advantage of his good nature, as if she doesn't do that already on a daily basis. But Junior says he's confident that he won't let it happen. Livia asks Junior about Hesh, saying that her husband Johnny used to like him and that Tony seems to take his every word as gospel. And Junior figures out that she's implying that she should tax Hesh for some extra revenue. Tony plays Battleship with his Russian Gumar, Irina, but can't get a boner because he'd rather talk than get his weenie wet. When Irina doesn't talk, Tony ends the session early and gives Irina $2 to go somewhere else. Irina is angry about Tony not sinking his submarine, so they have a pleasant chat. Haha, just kidding, they start fighting each other.
Come here. You fucking burned me!
Chris barges in another card game and tells Tony that Hesh wants a word with him. And Hesh complains to Tony about the new payments that he's required to make to Junior. Tony is pissed about Junior being a pain in the ass after like 5 minutes of becoming boss. And Hesh tells Tony that he's considering leaving town. But Tony tells Hesh to sit tight so that he can negotiate with Junior. Tony has an extremely weird dream where he gets a sloppy toppy Gluck Gluck 3000 underneath his sheets as he lip syncs to a song while being surrounded by a bunch of romantic candles. Tony says that it was some of the best Battleship that he's ever played, and the voice of Irina can be heard in the bed. However, as Tony pulls the sheets, it turns out to absolutely not be Irina.
Tony, I love your cannoli.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm okay. Go back to sleep.
This show is fucking weird. We're introduced to Johnny Sack, the underboss of the Lupertazzi crime family, as Tony talks to him about Junior being annoying. Tony tells Johnny Sack to help him negotiate with Junior and reduce his demands. And he goes back to his anniversary dinner with Carm, who's still pissed about the whole deal with Melfi. She complains that Tony spent time with Johnny Sack rather than with her at the table. And Tony apologizes, saying that he has a lot in his mind. And Carm's like, fuck this shit, and tells Tony to drive them home. Carm tells Tony in the car how she feels like shit because of Tony's actions, saying that she feels like a sex object to Tony rather than an actual person. And while Tony tries to pass the blame on the Prozac as per Melfi's warning, Carm's like, Oh, Melfi warned you. Oh, I see how it is. And she storms off. Tony gives Melfi some more coffee. And Melfi tells Tony that it's inappropriate of her to accept gifts from patients. Tony realizes that he's gonna need to find another way to get into Melfi's pants. And out of the blue, the perfect idea drops in his lap, as Melfi answers a call about an emergency with her car. We'll get to that later though. Tony says that he's been doing fine lately, and that he might just flush his Prozac down the toilet, saying that it's been causing more problems than fixing them. Melfi thinks that he's referring to stomach aches and insomnia, but Tony says that it's something else entirely, and Melfi pinpoints the issue. That issue being a diminished libido. Melfi says that Tony's boner troubles may not be because of the medication, and asks Tony if it may be because of Tony's old age.
When's the last time you had a prostate exam?
Hey, I don't even let anybody wag their finger in my face.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have laughed.
Don't apologize.
Oh, boy.
You got a nice laugh.
All right, let's be serious.
Hey, I'm serious.
Melfi mentions that depression can also cause a decreased libido, but Tony says that he still gets raging hard-ons when he wakes up, so Melfi crosses it off being a physical problem. Carm deals with her failing marriage by buying a shitload of furniture, and they go, and then Tony leaves. Tony and Johnny Sack have a sit-down with Junior to negotiate his tax on Hesh, where Tony pretends to have not met up with Johnny the night before so that Junior doesn't get suspicious. The rest of the guys also play along with this act, making Junior think that he's a top-tier badass. And it ends up working, as Junior eventually agrees to lower the taxes by half. Tony pisses like a racehorse as he sees a naked lady showering. And when she opens the door, it's revealed to be the Melfinator, which jump scares Tony again. Tony has fucking with Irina again, and he tells her that she'd look really good in a less revealing outfit. You know, like a businesswoman type of outfit. Yeah, I get it. Irina says fuck you and leaves, and Tony later complains about Carmela supposedly burning him, even though it was really Irina. He says the reason she burned him was because he suggested she dress sexy. And by sexy, he means simple. And by simple, he means...
like you.
Yeah, like Melfi. Wait, what the fuck? Tony folds immediately and begins to describe Melfi's physique and personality, saying that she's gentle and soft and all that. And he reaches over and plants a kiss on her lips, which Melfi quickly rejects. She ends the meeting early, telling Tony that they should talk about this a different time. And Tony walks out of there with a massive pair of blue balls. Later that night, Melfi reads a book at her house, when she hears people loudly swearing outside. She looks out the window and watches as a bunch of people drive away. And later the next day, she realizes that all of her car troubles have been magically fixed. Meanwhile, Mikey drags the guy who sold drugs to the designer's son to the bridge from the first episode, and tosses him over per Junior's orders. Man, that guy seems like a real dummy. This guy was a man by the name of Rusty Irish, who was the biggest earner in the DeMeo crime family. And Capo Larry Boris is pissed at Tony for creating a Frankenstein's monster by giving the role of boss to Junior. Everyone else is angry as well, since Junior's fucking them over with bouts of lost income and attempts to assert dominance. And they ask Tony to talk to Junior again so he can knock it off. Tony meets Livy at the retirement home, who, to the surprise of no one, shows resentment and hatred to every living being around her.
Playing bingo, Olivia? Oh, not tonight, honey. You know, she's a degenerate gambler.
Tony complains to Livia about Junior making bad moves in the business, trying his best to get through to Junior by Livia, but Livia says she wants to die and walks away. Carm talks to Phil at the church, talking about her regrets about letting Tony take therapy with Melfi, and how she blames herself for letting Tony get involved with Gumars in the first place because of her being busy with the house and the family. Phil tells Carm that she's not without sin in this situation and to pray to God for guidance, while Tony goes #womenbeshopping and bitches to Melfi about Carm spending money like crazy. Melfi addresses the kissing incident from the week before, but Tony brushes over it and asks Melfi how she's enjoying her car, which causes Melfi to connect the dots and realize what Tony did. Melfi tells Tony that this was an invasion of her privacy, and demands Tony to tell her what other things he did behind her back.
Answer me.
I love you.
Anthony.
I'm in love with you. I dream about you. I think about you all the time. I can't get excited about any other women. There's nothing else to say.
Let me start here. I know this may be very hard for you to swallow, but you're only feeling this way because we've made such progress.
What?
I've been gentle. That's my job. I listen. That's what I do best. You've made me all of the things you feel are missing in your wife and in your mother.
Tony feels attacked by this statement, proclaiming that he isn't some sort of mama's boy and doesn't need love or validation, even though he definitely does. But before he walks out the door, Melfi tells Tony to keep coming back to therapy, since all of this is simply a byproduct of progress. Tony and Junior watch a Little League game as Tony tells Junior the story of Augustus, the former emperor of Rome, and how he shared his wealth with the people around him, causing the longest period of peace in Rome's history. Junior gets the point pretty quickly, telling Tony to quit tiptoeing, and he switches the subject to how Tony has been seemingly down in the dumps lately. But Tony tells Junior that he's alright as Junior gives him a suspicious glance. Later, Tony tells Hesh that Junior took Hesh's tax money and spread it evenly among the top 5 guys. And Tony says that he's glad that he gave Junior the job, since he doesn't have to deal with the stress. They watch Hesh's horses walk around, whom Tony says that he envies.
I got no bills, no headaches, no family cotsies running around. One horse likes another horse, they go up to each other, they fuck, that's it. No problems, no 100 questions, no guilt. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Tony gives Hesh his share of the money, and later, Tony and Carm talk at the pool, where Tony clears up the air about Melfi and his therapy. Carm admits that she was jealous of Melfi's ability to help Tony with his life, and the two kiss and make up. Later, during a celebratory banquet, Tony gives a toast to Junior, saying that, family or not, he's thankful for his rise as boss.
Salud.
To Junior.
In this great ending montage, we watch as the government gathers information on the DeMeo crime family, with the hierarchy labeled on a pinboard. Jackie is taken off the board and replaced with Junior, ending the episode. The unique music selections used in the show was another aspect that gives The Sopranos its flair. In the ending montage of this episode, an instrumental version of the song Paparazzi by Exhibit is used, which fits the tone of the scene perfectly, as well as being a pretty fitting name given all the pictures collected of all the members. I love this shot of the camera drifting over Tony's picture and onto Junior's, showing how Tony has fooled the government, as well as Junior himself, into thinking that Junior is the one controlling everything. Overall, this was another solid episode. I really enjoyed the plotline of Tony figuring out his feelings with Melfi and how it ties back with his need for love and respect that he lacks with the people around him. Junior becoming boss is also a pretty great plotline, as he quickly starts abusing his power because he's an asshole. Junior himself is such a fun character to watch. Dominic Cannese's acting really makes this old, disgruntled character come to life. Overall, I'm feeling another high beats here. Season 1, Episode 7, Down Neck.
Woke up this morning, got
AJ and his friends steal a bottle of wine from the church, which God himself immediately punishes them for by having them eat shit during gym class.
Is that alcohol in your breath?
Oh, no.
Tony meets up with Chris at the construction job, where Chris complains about his hard day's work of sitting on his ass and doing nothing. They make fun of this construction guy for being poor and not paying his dues, and then they walk away. Whee! Tony and Carm are called down to the principal's, where they're told about AJ's drinky-drink times with his friends. Father Agini talks about how stealing the sacramental wine was an affront to God, and introduces Carm and Tony to the school psychologist, who tells the two that AJ may have ADD due to his reckless behavior and hyperactivity. Tony says that they can just fix it by beating AJ, but everyone gives him a dirty look for this, so he quickly backtracks while still implying that he should beat AJ. The school psychologist says that they're gonna start testing on AJ soon, and later that night, miserable piece of shit Livia and Uncle Junior join the family for dinner, where Junior says hell yeah to AJ's friend going pukey puke on the teacher. Tony says hell no to Uncle Junior, telling him not to encourage AJ. But Livia gets the ball rolling on exposing Tony by telling the story of how he stole a car when he was 10, causing Junior to tell a story of when he stole a shit ton of lobsters and sold them for a profit. AJ says hell yeah, but Tony's like, I said hell no! Saying that this type of stuff is wrong even though he kills people for money. AJ says yeah sure to this, and Carm tells AJ to shut his stupid fucking mouth, telling him no Mario Kart for 3 weeks.
And no TV.
No.
And you are not going to sit on that internet either.
The editing in the show is really good. AJ goes wham 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 no Mario Kart and jumps out his bedroom window. And the two discuss AJ's potential diagnosis, with Carm mentioning that AJ's always playing with the tongue of his shoe. And they both talk about whether or not he even has it in the first place. They also talk about Meadow knowing about Tony's involvement with the mafia.
Really?
What the fuck?
What makes you say that?
Are you in?
Shit! Dude, what the fuck? Like I said, the editing of the show is really, really good. Tony says that they should tell Meadow more about the family business here soon. And the next day, Tony goes to Melfi's office, talking about how bullshit AJ's supposed ADD is. He says that he doesn't see AJ's behavior as abnormal, which makes sense considering Tony's track record as a professional lobster seller. And Melfi asks if he sees AJ's actions as a reflection of his own, which Tony doesn't answer. It's implied in this scene that AJ's potential ADD may stem from Tony's genes, as Tony is somewhat preoccupied with the tip of his shoe as he talks to Melfi, paralleling Carm's observation about AJ and his shoes. This might be just a coincidence, but hey, it's interesting if it was intentional. Melfi brings up the subject of Tony's love for her, and Tony brings up the fact that he doesn't need her, since he already has a hot Russian girlfriend, which Melfi finds very interesting that he's only bringing her up just now. The next morning, Carm yells at AJ to get his ass up, and AJ responds by blasting Beat Rice videos on his speaker. As Tony takes some more Prozac to deal with his stress, we're taken to a flashback to Tony's childhood in the 60s, where a much younger Uncle Junior picks up a much younger Tony's dad. Livia brushes Tony off as he misses the school bus. As he walks to school, however, he watches his dad chase down a guy who owes him money and beats the shit out of him with Uncle Junior. And the scene ends with yet another bout of great editing as we cut back to modern day Tony. You know that thing that Windows does where, when a file crashes, it causes everything to freeze and make everything slightly white before giving the error message? I swear to God, as I was writing the script, when I saw the scene transition to white, I thought my file had corrupted, and I nearly exited out of the media player before I realized the editing in the show sucks balls. Tony describes to Melfi the scene we just saw, and how much it affected him seeing his father beat the shit out of someone at a young age. He describes his father's belt as his favorite development tool, but describes this particular beating as different, since he could tell that his dad knew what he was doing. He describes his father as a positive old man, which puts Tony in a good mood, and it reminds him of his mother, which puts him right back in a bad mood. He describes the shady activities that his father did behind the scenes, and Melfi asks Tony when he found out and how he felt, which Tony doesn't know about or care to answer. And Melfi asks when he's gonna do when AJ inevitably starts asking questions, which Tony definitely doesn't know or care to answer. Tony complains to the rest of his boys about how he's exhausted with dealing with his kids, and they all agree, saying that they've got to deal with children of their own finding out about this little thing of ours. Luckily, Chris is back in action to do something stupid to distract everyone from their worries, stealing some watches from a FedEx truck in broad daylight, which pisses Tony off. AJ takes a test for ADD, which he's all but confirmed to have as he distracts himself from describing the pictures by rambling on about the first episode of South Park. Carm starts panicking as she reads more into ADD and how it's gonna ruin AJ's life, blah blah blah. And she implies to Tony that AJ might have gotten the stupid genes from his father's side, since Meadow was graduating with all sorts of awards and honors while AJ's stealing wine during school hours. An implication which pisses off Tony again.
Meet my grandson.
This is your grandson?
He rode his bike all the way over to visit his grandma.
How come he's not in school?
Because he was a bad boy.
Ow.
Yes, he was. That's why.
Oh, he's a big one.
She had a stroke.
AJ hangs out with Livia at the retirement home since he can't play Mario Kart, and he tells Livia that he went to a psychiatrist, which shocks Livia, as AJ tells Livia that Tony sees a psychiatrist as well. Livia figures that Tony is taking therapy to complain about her, and begins to defend herself like crazy and starts fake crying as AJ eats a pear. Later, AJ causes Tony to get a flat tire, where Tony complains about having to get braces for AJ. He asks AJ how the psychiatrist meeting went, but AJ says that he doesn't need to say anything if he doesn't want to, which pisses off Tony for the 748th time this episode. Okay, third time, but you get what I'm saying. Tony asks AJ what he meant by that "yeah, sure" remark from the night before at dinner, nervous about the fact that he's going to have to tell his son about the family business eventually, and AJ decides not to pass any blame on his sister. He tells Tony that some kids at school made some jokes that Tony is in the mafia, along with the fact that some feds were watching Uncle Jackie's funeral. Tony says, "Ha ha ha ha, that's really cool," and then he goes to Melfi's, where he says, "This is so not fucking cool." Tony is still nervous that AJ's going to find out about his involvement in the mafia eventually, and figures that AJ's potential ADD is a result of Tony's genes, which, in turn, is a result of his father, Johnny Boy's genes. Tony is having a conundrum with this whole nature versus nurture bullshit, since while Pussy is a stone-cold gangster, his children are incredibly successful. Meanwhile, Leopold and Loeb, two sociopaths, were raised by a loving family. Tony says that he sometimes thinks about how his life would be like had his father not gotten caught up in the world of the mob. And Melfi asks Tony to reiterate how he felt when he found out about his father's business, which Tony still doesn't quite know the answer to. Melfi brings up the ducks again, and recalls the weird dream that Tony had where his penis fell off and a duck took it away, which Tony described as a bad omen.
That something was going to happen in your family? Is this the terrible thing?
Look, if you know something, please, quit fucking around.
I think it's important to remember. He who doesn't understand history is doomed to repeat it.
Melfi continues to ask Tony for more information about him and his father's relationship, and we're taken back to another young Tony flashback, where Uncle Junior almost kills him with a baseball. We're immediately drawn back to Melfi's office, where Melfi points out that this is a strikingly positive memory, considering all the shit going down between the two in the current day. Tony brings up his older sister, Janice, who he suddenly has a minor outburst over the mere mention of her, since she decided to move to California and stop going under the name Soprano, which Tony sees as sacrilege. It might also have to do with the fact that Janice was a bitch to Tony. As we cut back to the young Tony flashback, where Janice brags that she gets to go somewhere with her dad as she flips Tony off in the car, forcing Tony to stay home with the worst mother of all time, Livia.
Don't want to hear about that stupid electric organ anymore.
It's not stupid.
It's driving me crazy. I could stick this fork in your eye.
She wasn't gonna do it.
Tony tells Melfi why he's starting to remember everything out of the blue, and that's because of what happened later the next day. Young Tony sneaks into the trunk of his dad's car, as he and Janice drive over to the carnival, where present-day Tony describes himself being heartbroken over what he felt was clear favoritism. However, as time went on, he witnessed a brutal scene of watching his dad and Uncle Junior get arrested by the police, as Janice cries for them to be released. As it turns out, Janice was being brought to the carnival so that the mob meetings would seem a lot more sweet and innocent than they actually were. And while Melfi thinks that the sight of watching his father getting arrested must have traumatized Tony, Tony insists that it was all fine and dandy, since his dad came home a few hours later. Johnny Boy gets Tony and Janice some fent as some injured dude named Rocco congratulates Johnny Boy out the window.
I don't understand. The man your father beat up was the same one who was congratulating him?
Wait, what the fuck? Yeah, it turns out Johnny Boy was arrested while still being on parole, and that Tony was told that he was out being a cowboy while he was still in prison. Tony proclaims that, despite what he's been through, he's still proud to be the son of Johnny Boy, and that while he wants AJ to be proud of him, he doesn't want him to be like him. However, Tony believes that AJ is inevitably going to wind up taking on the life of his father before him, saying that all these events are preordained and in our blood.
You're born to this shit. You are what you are.
We're taken to another flashback, where Johnny Boy tells Livia about a job Rocco offered him to work at in Reno, Nevada. But Livia says that she'd rather smother her own children than let him work at that job, which scares Tony. Speaking of Livia, Junior says hello to her in the retirement home as Tony barges in, and Junior barges out.
He's so full of himself since becoming capo regime. It makes me sick.
Sorry, what?
He's so full of himself since becoming capo regime. It makes me sick.
Another thing about this show, the ADR is not exactly the best. ADR is very common when it comes to movies and TV shows, and a lot of them do it in a way that feels natural and seamless. With The Sopranos, though, it really feels like they just took the straight audio from the studio and just Elmer glued it onto the scene, without adding any compression or effects or what have you to at least make it feel like it fits into the scene. It's a lot less obvious when you're watching with speakers, but with headphones, it could not be more obvious. On Bravo, David Chase. Anyway, Livia talks to Tony about Rocco and how he and his family became millionaires ever since moving to Nevada. Tony mentions that Johnny Boy really wanted to go, but Livia claims that he never wanted to go in the first place. A very blatant lie that Tony sees right through. Tony implies to Livia that Johnny Boy might have been better off had he gotten support from somebody other than his piece of shit wife. But Livia tells Tony that, if he wants support, he should go see a psychiatrist.
You're a real stone player, aren't you, Ma? You threaten to smother his children.
You know, everybody thought Dad was the ruthless one, but I gotta hand it to you. If you'd been born after those feminists, you would have been the real gangster.
Tony and Carm hear the result of AJ's ADD test, which, predictably, came back positive. However, Tony and Carm learn that people need to display 6 out of 9 symptoms in order to be diagnosed, and that AJ only displayed 5, one of them being fidgeting while sitting down. Tony, who also fidgets while sitting down, gets really hung up on this symptom, asking questions like what constitutes a fidget. He claims that everyone deals with these types of symptoms growing up, and that AJ doesn't have any type of disease whatsoever. He walks out, and Carm agrees with him, saying that they're not paying for the test as she walks out with him. Tony watches porn on his TV while working out, and he sees AJ studying upstairs, who says that he's depressed because he can't play Mario Kart. Tony says that life's not fair, but decides to make it a little more fair by making him and AJ a bowl of ice cream. Proving to himself that he doesn't need AJ to become like his own father, Tony decides to himself to spend more time with AJ, bonding with him as he nearly sprays whipped cream down his shirt. ending the episode. This episode was pretty good. There's a big debate of nature versus nurture throughout this episode, as Tony himself is asked whether or not things would have been different had his father not got caught up in the business. In my personal opinion, however, I believe that Tony was destined to live a life of trouble ever since he was born. Like I said, it's implied that AJ's borderline ADD was inherited by his father, which Tony himself struggled with as he got in trouble often in his childhood years and essentially skipped college so that he could live a life of crime. Even if his father wasn't in the mafia, I believe it was Tony's nature that would have eventually gotten him to live some sort of troubled life. It's just that, in this case, Tony was also nurtured into this life by his manipulative asshole mother and his crime-driven father, leading to the Tony that we see today. It's unlike a lot of other shows, where the main character would actively choose to live this life as a way to fulfill their personal goals and motivations. In this case, Tony was implanted into the life the moment he came out of the womb. That's what I personally believe anyway. The themes of the old times clashing with the new times are expanded upon a bit in this episode, as Tony's actions growing up were seen as him just acting like a growing boy, while AJ's actions are seen as a result of a mild mental disorder. I believe that the reason Tony is taken so aback by AJ's diagnosis is not only because of his traditional values, but also because he sees a lot of himself in AJ. Tony has stated that he doesn't want AJ to end up living the life that Tony is now, but with this medical diagnosis in his face, it feels a lot more inevitable rather than preventable. I find it kind of interesting that Tony is nervous about AJ finding out, not because of AJ potentially being disgusted by the fact that Tony kills people for a living, but the fact that AJ may be inspired to join the mafia himself. As if it's already in AJ's nature to think that way due to him getting in trouble the same way Tony did. The rest of the episode was pretty good overall. I like whenever AJ gets into some sort of trouble in this show, as I think it makes for a pretty entertaining story. I thought the flashbacks with young Tony were kind of boring though. I don't know if Better Call Saul has poisoned my brain or whatever, but I really enjoy it when the show lets us figure out that we're in a flashback, rather than using the framing device of the character telling the story and being like, well, back in my day, I used to shoot people, or something like that. To be fair though, The Sopranos takes a lot more of a linear approach to the story, rather than jumping back and forth like Better Call Saul. So I can't blame them for taking this route, but either way, the flashbacks aren't exactly that interesting personally. Overall, I'm giving this episode a B tier. Season 1, Episode 8, The Legend of Tennessee Moltisanti. Chris has an extremely weird dream, as he floats around the pork store while watching Adriana get a mouthful of meat. Oh, whoops, guess I was seeing things. The sentence,
"In the Czech Republic too, we love pork. Ever had our sausages?"
is repeated several times as a man in a translucent body bag stares at Chris through the window in one of the most beautiful backgrounds I've ever seen. Chris creates a sandwich for the man, Emil Kolar, the guy who Chris killed in the first episode of the show, as a strong wind blows around the store, with no sound that can be heard coming from it. Emil tells Chris that he fucked up big time as he gives Chris a handful of bullets, which Chris gives to the hand in the counter to get rid of.
Ah! Let go of me! Let go!
Chris and the rest of the boys attend Larry Boy's daughter's wedding, where Livia trash talks Larry after Larry says something nice to her. As his daughter celebrates her marriage, he goes around telling the other boys about federal indictments that are coming to crash down on the DeMeo crime family soon. And we get this great shot of everyone grouped up together and trying to figure out a solution to this problem. Junior says that they should all hide out for a bit, and people immediately turn to Tony for a definitive answer, which pisses off Junior since he's the boss and everything. To make sure Junior doesn't get suspicious, Tony agrees with Junior, and the rest of the mob guys ruin this poor girl's wedding by getting them and their families the fuck out of there. Tony goes around the house collecting his hidden cash, and Carm thinks that the world's gonna end as Meadow secretly watches on the stairs. AJ pulls a Walter White again as he keeps trying to kill the stupid fly as Meadow barges in, telling AJ that the cops are on their way.
Boot your computer, the cops are coming.
So?
You want them to see all that porno you downloaded?
Everyone's getting rid of the evidence in this joint, as Tony tells Carm to give him her jewelry, including her engagement ring. Carm says no, since it wasn't stolen, but then Tony's like, and then Carm's like, what the fuck, you stole this? And then Tony's like, no, nope, no, nope, no. No! While Pussy is busy cooking the books, Chris is busy writing one of the greatest screenplays of all time. I thought I was Dyad, but I managed to get the drip on him. Yes. Chris accidentally deletes the script, the TV show equivalent of burning down the Library of Alexandria, but Adriana manages to get it back, and she tells Chris to stop acting like a dumb baby. She reads the script for Chris, making fun of him for misspelling shit, and they kiss each other as Adriana says how impressed she is with Chris applying himself like this.
I love movies. You know that. That smell in Blockbuster, that candy and carpet smell, I get high off.
If he gets high off of that, he would have fucking overdosed on my old movie theater job. You find all sorts of weird shit there. I remember one time I found a wallet that was completely empty, no ID, money, card, nothing. All except for one singular condom. There wasn't even a condom in it, the package was opened already. To this day, I have no fucking idea why it was like that. I thought maybe the guy just got robbed or something, but who the fuck takes the condom out of the packet instead of just taking the packet with the condom inside? Are they stupid? Anyways, Adriana says that Chris should really be getting rid of evidence following the indictments. And Adriana gets a call, telling them to turn on Channel 6. As it turns out, the indictment rumors turn out to be real, as everyone watches a news broadcast confirming that the government is about to fuck the DeMaio family hard. They mention Junior becoming boss, the Sopranos' ties to the family, and the death of Brendan. Chris makes fun of when they mention that it might have been part of a power dispute, because it wasn't. Brendan was just stupid. They call Brendan a soldier, which pisses Chris off, and we're introduced to Melfi's family, including her Bill Hader lookalike son, Jason. Melfi mentions a certain Italian-American patient, and they all immediately assume that he's mobbed up because he's Italian. Already assuming her patient's in the mob, they tell Melfi to refer this patient to another doctor, since sociopaths can't be treated. And then they have the gall to act like her patient is the reason that everyone has preconceived notions about Italian-Americans, despite the fact that they themselves are making preconceived notions about an Italian-American. I mean, to be fair, they're not technically wrong in this case, since, you know, Tony's in the mob, but still, I'm right. They continue talking about how the mob has given Italian Americans around the country a bad name, and they raise a toast to say fuck the haters. Chris continues writing his Oscar-winning script as he gets a call from Tony, telling him to come down to the Bing and to get some dessert for the guys. Chris is forced to wait 5 entire minutes for his dessert. And right as it's about to be his turn, this guy named Gino comes in, which the cashier takes the order of before Chris. This pisses Chris off like crazy, but the cashier asserts himself and takes Gino's order, and Chris forces him to take a walk. Remember this Gino fella, because he's going to be very important later and not for the reasons you think. Oh wow, a sound effect to imply an important character / location for later in the show, or not condescending. Chris holds the cashier at gunpoint and forces him to give up some pastries for free, and demands the guy to show him some respect next time he sees him, as if the cashier is a part of the mob. Chris shoots the guy in the foot because he's an asshole.
You motherfucker! You shot my foot!
It happens.
Damn, Chris, you really showed that minimum wage employee what's what. Chris is clearly unsatisfied with the position he's in right now, as the guy who had phone troubles at the Bing tells Chris that he wasn't even mentioned on the news and how awesome it was when Brendan got mentioned on the news. It's obvious that Chris wants to be recognized in some way, shape, or form, even if it means compromising his position. So he writes movie scripts based on his life against Tony's wishes, lashes out at random Krispy Kreme employees, and worst of all, slams the desserts on the table.
Hey, this fool you done. What's wrong with you?
Carm meets Livia at the retirement home, where Carm tells Livia to get ready for a day in the town. Livia suspects that there's something wrong, and proceeds to ask Carm if something's wrong 40 times. She eventually suspects that it has to do with the government indictments, but Carm tells her to shut her face and get in the car. As she drives away, Tony rushes into Livia's apartment and hides all of his money and weaponry around the place. At therapy, Tony tells Melfi that he's going to be planning a vacation soon, but doesn't know when it'll be, which I'd say would bring up extremely massive red flags if it weren't for the fact that Melfi's been tuning into the news lately. Chris has fallen into a major slump lately, and Paulie walks through the door, telling Chris that he recently got asked by a cop about a dude who shot another dude's foot at a bakery, which is super mean. Paulie asks Chris what's been up with him lately, concerned with how inconsiderate he was with the pastries, and Chris claims that he's been struggling writing his movie script lately, and that he's only written 19 out of 120 recommended pages. Paulie says that he'll feel better if they get their dicks sucked and forget about tomorrow, but Chris goes on this rant about how he feels aimless, and that he lacks the arc that people in movies and TV have.
Like everybody starts out somewheres, and then they do something, something gets done to them, changes their life. That's called their arc. Where's my arc?
While Paulie says that he doesn't have an arc and is perfectly content, Chris elaborates, feeling like he's going nowhere and improving nothing, even after murdering someone like the aforementioned emo Kolar that he's been having nightmares about. Chris tries to ask Pussy for help with this issue, and Pussy tells Chris that he'll get over it eventually, telling him a story of nightmares he used to have about a guy he killed for months. Chris thinks that Emil is trying to warn him in his nightmares somehow, trying to think back to if they did something wrong when disposing of his body. But Pussy makes a dumb joke and Chris gets pissed again. Chris decides to get the bartender to retrieve the body of Emil, and the bartender pukes his guts in the water as Chris says that they're gonna take his body to Pine Barrens. Oh, shut up! Melfi and her ex-husband talk about potentially selling off their property, and it quickly devolves into an argument, with Melfi saying that he's obsessed with the image that Italian Americans have in culture. Her ex tells Melfi that she needs to drop her alleged mobster patience soon, since, no matter how you slice it, he's going to be evil and stay evil no matter what. Tony evilly stands around the place as he waits for Chris to arrive.
Sorry I'm late, the alarm was...
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Tony is furious with Chris, yelling at him for doing all this stupid shit like shooting the cashier and digging up Emo's body while under heavy scrutiny from the government.
That fucking Georgie comes into the club, he's got vomit all over his shirt. I ask him, what the fuck? He says you're digging up somebody you clipped 3 months ago.
I was worried.
Shut up!
I love how you can tell that both these guys were trying really hard not to break character during this scene. Look at this, Michael Imperioli's trying not to laugh his ass off. Chris says that he's tired of the regularness in life, and comes to the extremely bright conclusion that he has cancer, since he feels like something terrible is happening in his body. Tony, very clearly familiar with these feelings of aimlessness, says to Chris that he may have depression, but Chris proclaims that he isn't a mental weakling, a remark that definitely hit Tony pretty close to home, since Tony is legitimately depressed but doesn't want to admit it by being like, hey, I'm not stupid, which turns out to be untrue as Tony proceeds to light a cigarette the wrong way.
Oh, fuck.
Tony also says that Chris might have problems with serotonin, which he says he saw on a show last night and definitely not from a psychiatrist that deals with these exact problems, and asks Chris if he's ever thought about blowing his brains out, which Chris vehemently rejects.
Imagine those fucking losers blowing their skulls all over the bathroom.
It's fucking pathetic.
Both of them have thought about killing themselves. AJ is finally able to play video games again as Tony heads to the door, where he's greeted by 2 FBI agents with a search warrant. AJ looks back and sees that his father is talking to the literal cops, but doesn't let that fact distract him from his important gaming session. The FBI searches around the house and starts fucking everything up, including taking Meadow's computer and breaking a bowl in the refrigerator.
Grasso, get something to clean that.
Grasso, ti faccia culo così.
Your ass. Hey.
Huh, I wonder what that means in English. Wait, that can't be right.
Ti faccia culo così.
Your ass. Hey.
Wait, hold on. Oh. Later at dinner, Tony gives the family a lecture about Italian-American pride, and how that one guy that spoke Italian was only brought to the house because of his background, saying that he probably gets treated poorly at the office. Karn brings up the fact that an Italian invented the telephone, and Tony gets pissed because AJ thinks it's Alexander Graham Bell, when it was actually famed WWE superstar Stone Cold Steve Austin.
I'm Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I invented the telephone. You know that Stone Cold Steve Austin likes to revolutionize history, and that's the bottom line. Can I get a hell yeah?
I don't know anything about wrestling. Tony gets mad that Alexander Graham Bell took credit from such an iconic Italian figure, and Meadow points out that the Mafia was also invented by Italians, but AJ tells her to shut the fuck up. Tony continues listing a bunch of notable Italians and things Italian people did for the country, and Italians that faced injustices due to their background.
And of course, Francis Albert.
Oh, they have definitely fucked to this guy. Melfi tells Tony that he needs to pay up for the meeting that he missed a bit ago, and Tony gets really worked up over it. Tony starts literally throwing money in Melfi's face, angrily saying that he feels like he's pouring his heart out to a call girl, and walks out of the room for the 2 to the power of 16th time. This Saul Goodman-ass comedian makes the worst jokes ever as Junior tells Olivia about his headaches, saying that he suspects that there's a bad apple in their posse, and not to let Tony know since he's already under enough pressure. Olivia mentions that he'd probably tell it to a psychiatrist, officially spilling the beans to Junior about his visits.
God only knows what he says.
Tony?
Yes, Tony. Tony, who had such a terrible mother.
I could stick this fork in your eye!
Olivia acts as vindictive and manipulative as ever, telling Junior to let there not be any repercussions. Chris finds out from his mom that his name was mentioned in the newspaper, which makes him jump for joy, and Melfi visits her family therapist, where the conversation eventually shifts over to Melfi's supposed mob client and a recent encounter with him. Richard says to Melfi that she's finally feeling appropriate emotions toward this patient, those emotions being disgust and fear, but Melfi tells him to shut the fuck up, saying that people who work in therapy need to get their hands dirty at some point, and that the mob lives in Richard's head rent-free. The therapist makes a god-awful joke joke and then tells a completely irrelevant story that goes nowhere. And Chris heads over to buy a copy of the newspaper where his name was mentioned. And he steals the rest of the copies from the machine to tell everyone the great news, ending the episode. I really love how Chris is so starved for validation and respect that he gets excited over being publicly exposed. If he's this excited over a tiny print in the paper, imagine if he got one of those YouTube expose videos made on him. He'd get a fucking boner. This episode was genuinely great. While I didn't really like Melfi's whole subplot with Richard being an annoying dick, it still fleshed out her character quite a bit, as we got to see her act like a normal person outside of her profession. The plot with Chris wanting validation and respect was amazing. I've really started to appreciate Chris more and more than I did on my first watch. Michael Imperioli brings an insane amount of character to the role, and I loved seeing his constant want for admiration combined with a fear that he feels for the murders, or murder, rather, that he's committed. The whole deal with the government barging in on everyone was also really fun to watch too. I can't lie, I'm feeling another S tier for this episode. Bravo, Chase. Season 1, Episode 9. Boca.
Warning, the following segment is about to contain an indescribable amount of references to female anatomy. If you have children watching this, I advise you to make them keep watching in order to educate themselves. Those freeloading pieces of shit.
Woke up this morning, got my...
AJ runs with a bunch of wild dogs as Livia pretends to grieve for Johnny Boy.
My son. The mental patient.
Oh my god, the man is paying your rent. Calm your fucking tits. Livia complains again about Tony seeing a psychiatrist, but Junior tells her to calm her tits as well, even though he's not exactly a fan of it either. We're taken to a scene of one of my favorite things ever. Grown adults yelling at their kids' Little League games. Since it's The Sopranos, it's made even funnier by the fact that the characters still yell and swear at the children like it's an actual soccer game.
You blow that whistle one more time, I'm gonna stick it up your fucking ass! Get off the field! Now! Fucking son of a... Get off the field!
You're a hell of a job.
One of the coaches encourages one of the players, Allie, very suspiciously. And she scores a goal as Tony and the rest of the Fun Time Lollipop gang jump around like they hit a 12-team parlay in their fantasy leagues. Hey, speaking of parlays, this video is sponsored by fucking nobody! Gotcha! Tony and his guys talk about how genius the coach is. And Tony offers to make a deal with Artie as a way to get some extra cash. But Artie says he sucks at math and leaves. Tony invites the coach, Don Hauser, over to the Bada Bing for some drinks on the house to celebrate. And Don talks about how super duper ultra excited he is about being able to coach his own daughter and not having to move constantly. They give Don a free visit to the Battleship Lounge, which Don declines. Batshit crazy detective Vin walks through the doors and tells Tony that Mikey Palmisi has hired a PI since he thinks that somebody's ratting for the government, and that the government is starting to crack down like crazy over these indictments, to the point that Vin may just have a case file of his own.
As it is, I'm up the street and a rape homicide. What I need now is to...
Wait, is that the fucking dad from Home Alone? Holy shit. Okay, look, I get Joe Pesci was also in that movie, but Jesus Christ. Charmaine calls Artie and tells him to come the fuck over back home right now. And Tony pats Artie on his bald head as Don decides to leave as well. Junior is going full Godfather as he talks to his lawyer in the lawyer's office about the indictments and what he should do to deal with them. And he tells Junior that his status is red hot with the government as they speak. Junior says that he's gonna dodge Uncle Sam by heading down to Boca with a lady friend. And he and Mikey share a urinal as Mikey implies to Junior that, if there's a leak, it's coming from Tony's crew. Junior tells Mikey to fuck himself as he wipes his dick germ-laden hand on Mikey's cheek, and heads off to Boca. Meanwhile, Meadow is busy getting wasted with her soccer team in the woods, complimenting Coach Don for his coaching skills. They look around for Allie, the girl that the coach was trying to motivate earlier, and they find her, oh god, I can't show that on YouTube. Later in therapy, Tony describes what Allie was doing to her wrist, and that her mom told Tony that she had done it before in the past, which Melfi says qualifies as a suicidal gesture. Tony describes his frustration with this, talking about how Allie was born into a nice family and how she's normally very happy at the Sopranos household. And while Melfi says that teenage girls are usually under a lot of stress, Tony complains about he was told that girls in sports are less likely to do irresponsible things, and how frustrated he'd be if Meadow ended up killing herself, which comes across as less, I'm so sad I lost my daughter due to declining mental health, and more, oh great, I spent all this money on her and now she wants out? Give me a break! After an awkward moment of silence, Tony apologizes to Melfi for showering her with money like a stripper and calling her a whore. And later, Junior gropes this woman's ass, Bobby Sanfilippo, the woman he's taking down to Boca. At the retirement home, Larry Boy meets with Livia, who tells her that his mom's gonna be moving in as well. And then Tony comes to say hello, which puts this old fucking hag in a bad mood. Larry tells Tony how impressed he is with his plan of hiding their money in retirement homes, which Larry and Jimmy are planning on doing by moving their mothers in as well. As Tony reads the newspaper, however, he notices that Coach Don has taken a sizable chunk out of it, revealing that he's quitting after only 2 years, which is weird considering how gung-ho he was about coaching his own daughter just a few moments ago. They confront Don in the middle of a practice, asking why the fuck he's leaving them behind. And Don claims that he was offered by Rhode Island a larger salary and a free ride at college for his daughter.
What could I do? They made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah, well, you haven't heard ours yet. Hey, come on, Sue.
All the girls gather around as the coach talks with Silvio and Artie, and he tells them to keep practicing, and they all groan, with Meadow telling Don to go fuck himself. Don makes her run 20 laps around the field, the whole interaction leaving Silvio and Artie very confused and suspicious as they walk off the field. Down in Boca, Junior has some fun times with Bobby, talking about how he'd be toast if the boys found out the things he was doing to her. Or rather, the thing that he does to her. Which is, you see, if there was one thing that I'm sure Junior benefited from going to school, would have been learning and memorizing the alphabet, if you know what I mean. You know, Junior enjoys playing with her lips, with his lips, but like not her lips on her mouth. I mean, you know, like her other lips. He likes eating pussy. To make a long story short, eating pussy is very frowned upon in the Mafia, since it's not only seen as a very submissive and weak act, but it also implies that you like sucking dick as well. Junior explains this to Bobby when she asks why he wants to keep it a secret, and Tony keeps trying to make Artie an offer to make some dough, but Artie says he still can't do math. Tony suspects that Artie's pussying out because of Charmaine, and asks Artie why Charmaine hates him and treats him like he's in the Mafia or something. Artie lies and says that she doesn't, but Tony gets distracted by some douche wearing a baseball cap in the restaurant. He walks over to the douche's table and tells him to take it off. And while he initially says no, Tony uses nothing but his pure unlimited aura that forces the guy to take his cap off. And he hits on the dude's girlfriend and heads back. Allie watches some TV with Meadow as Tony and Carm head back, and she tells the two that she's going to continue playing despite the incident she faced. Meadow tells them that she didn't have to, but that she decided to anyway because it's what the rest of the team wanted. Definitely not tipping off to either Tony or Carm that something's really fucked up here. We're taken into the shitty Microsoft PowerPoint-ass transition back to Boca, where Junior and Bobby are dancing at a lounge. Junior tells Bobby that he's dead serious and that she'd better not tell anybody that he eats pussy, not realizing that members of the government are spying on Junior's ass as we speak. What the fuck? 2 shitty transitions in a row? Phew, David Chase, you were rocking my world. In an attempt to bribe Don into staying around, Tony sends Paulie and some other bada bing dudes to send over a ginormous TV to the Hauser household. Hauser says thanks but no thanks, and Paulie says okay but tells Don that the TV stays. Don acts weirdly defensive about this, telling Paulie that he knows all about him and his friends, and describing this bribe as extortion, as if there's something way worse that he's hiding than just randomly moving to Rhode Island. While getting her nails done, Bobby tells her friend that they should probably cut it down on the Junior eats pussy talk, and Livia ruins another family dinner by being a Junior says he loved Boca and says he doesn't go down enough, which Carm sarcastically says that wasn't what she heard. Junior's like, what the fuck did you mean by that? As everyone stares down tensely, but Carm pretends like she misspoke and moves on. Livia says that she doesn't trust Bobby, but Junior insists that she's a sweet girl, which makes Carm giggle again. And Meadow reveals out of the blue that she quit the soccer team. Tony angrily asks why, saying that she could have made it to the States. But Carm berates Tony, bringing up the fact that Allie slit her wrists. But Tony's like, come on, it was just a suicidal gesture, no big deal, which makes Meadow understandably walk out. Tony watches Battleship as Carm says that she's glad that Meadow resigned. And Tony asks what Carm meant by all those remarks earlier. Carm says that she can't say, but Tony goes Gucci Gucci goo to force Carm to spill the beans. And Carm tells Tony about Junior's pussy eating skills. Tony laughs his balls off, talking about how bad it'd be if this got out. But Carm's like, yeah, as if you don't do it to me. And then Tony's like, if you tell anybody I eat pussy, you're dead. Charmaine gets pissed at Artie for letting Tony and his friends bribe Coach Hauser with a big TV, saying that Artie knows what they're capable of. As we're taken to another scene of Tony's friends trying to get Coach Hauser to stay, with Chris bringing back the lost family dog in another attempt to make him stay. Tony tells Meadow that Coach Hauser is going to be sticking around to finish what he started, which causes Meadow to angrily leave the room. Tony follows Meadow to her room and berates her for not being appreciative enough of the skills that Hauser helped her obtain, and that she doesn't need to love her leader in order to be able to work with him.
Coach Hauser had sex with Allie.
Oh. Tony is pretty reasonably distraught with this, considering the pretty harsh comments he's made about Allie and her suicidal gestures. And while he initially tries to justify the things in his head by proposing that there might have just been some confusion, Carm says that there should not have been any confusion because he's a fucking pedophile. And Tony eventually gives up and storms out of the room. Tony discusses this horrible chain of events with the rest of his crew, as Artie comes in and tries to act like the big man on campus, telling Tony that he's done with bribing the coach forever. To which Silvio tells Artie that Coach Hauser has a weird case, and Artie says that he should die. Mikey tells Junior that the people he's having spy on Tony have come up with an insane discovery. Tony has been talking with a Russian chick, who is definitely part of the government and not at all one of Tony's gumars. Before Junior can tell Mikey how stupid he is, Tony and the rest of the boys pull up to play some golf, and they act all hunky-dory to one another, showing how disingenuous and backstabbing this entire crew really is. Tony purposefully talks while Mikey keeps trying to tee off, and Junior says that Tony's yapping problems wouldn't have cost him a game that he played when he was way younger, which seems to hit Tony weirdly really close to home. Tony strikes back at this insult by saying that he sucks at golf and subtly implying that he eats pussy.
What's that smell? Did you guys go to a sushi bar?
The fuck's he talking about?
I thought you were a bacala man, Uncle June. What are you doing eating sushi?
You fucking run off at the mouth, you know that?
South of the border, where the tuna fish play.
Junior strikes back at the strike back by telling Tony that he can at least deal with his own problems, implying to Tony that he knows about his psychiatric visits. I love how this is obviously a very big deal when it comes to the mafia, but in literally any other context, this would be the most tame and lame argument ever. You go to therapy! Oh yeah? Well, you eat pussy! Charmaine tells Artie that everyone's panicking over the coach being a certified pedophile and one of the worst ADR dubs I've ever heard.
The mother's on sedatives. She's completely unable to deal.
The father lives in Europe somewhere. They haven't reached him.
Come on, you couldn't have just recorded a line or two outside? Artie is still clearly frustrated with the conflicts between his wife and his mobster friends. As while she expresses concern with Coach Hauser getting whacked by Tony and his crew, Artie tries to justify it, saying that Hauser deserves some harsh treatment, and Charmaine angrily walks away. Junior talks to Mikey about how annoyed he is with Tony's sushi comments, calling Tony a mental weakling, and eventually spills the beans to Mikey about Tony's psychiatry visits.
My nephew is seeing a psychiatrist. Makes me want to cry.
I fucking knew it.
No, you didn't fucking know it. I just told you.
While Mikey says that this probably isn't a big deal, considering the client privilege that therapists have with their patients, Junior says that you might get scared and report this to the cops.
Anthony wants to play games, okay? I taught him games. I taught him how to play baseball.
You talking about clipping him?
Nobody would slap my wrist if I did.
Later in therapy, Tony talks about his anger toward Coach Hauser, and Melfi warns Tony about her duties with reporting this sort of behavior to law enforcement. Tony says that this isn't going to change anything, saying that the judge will probably just give the guy some therapy so he can talk about his bad childhood and mental health as if he's the real victim here. Which, reminds me of a certain other character. Melfi asks Tony why he feels like he always has to set things right, reflecting Tony's stress and anxiety of being the boss and constantly fighting for respect and love in the mafia and his family. And we're taking the bada bing, where Artie asks to talk with Tony again. Artie begs to Tony not to kill Don Hauser, saying that killing the guy isn't going to bring any true justice and that they should just bring the dude to jail instead. And while Tony says that the guy deserves to die and that he's likely just going to repeat his habits all over again, Artie remains firm on his stance, and Tony kicks him out. However, as Tony contemplates making the call, he thinks about what Melfi and Artie told him, and after a long period of time, eventually calls off the hit on Hauser, and reports his ass to the cops instead. Meanwhile, Junior heads back to Bobby's office, where he gets extremely pissed at her for leaking the news about his top-tier pussy-eating skills, and shoves a key lime pie right in her face. Junior tells Bobby to clean out her office while Bobby cries and says that she loves him. As Junior walks out of the office, upset about the fact that he had to do this to Bobby in order to keep up his tough guy persona. As Junior books it out of there, Tony watches the news as Hauser is arrested for striking the court of A minor, and he celebrates it by downing a shit ton of alcohol and Xanax. He arrives home that night in an incredibly euphoric mood, as he knocks a bunch of shit over and dances with Carm. Carm finds the spilled bottle of Xanax in Tony's pocket and tries to drag him to bed, but Tony responds by saying something extremely interesting.
I didn't hurt nobody.
Tony falls asleep on the floor while making out with his pillow, ending the episode. This was a pretty incredible episode. This entire episode deals with Tony, and to an extent, the rest of the Mafia, and their personalities conflicting with a constant tough guy persona that they have to put on everywhere they go. We're introduced to this with a subject of suicide, which follows from the previous episode with Chris talking to Tony about it in the car, and how Tony pretends to see this as weak and disingenuous despite very likely dealing with his own sorts of thoughts himself. However, suicide isn't the main subject that causes this conflict to inflate. Instead, it's eating pussy. Tony and the rest of the members of the Mafia are forced to put on a tough guy persona in order to seem as intimidating as possible. And if there's one even remotely slight crack in their mask, they're exposed and labeled as a weakling. It's what makes these seemingly really stupid and pointless conflicts so tense, as the constant fighting for respect causes these people to relentlessly compensate for the things that they do. Which is why Junior is highly considering killing Tony for the sushi jokes, along with Tony attending therapy, attacking Tony's character while defending his own. At the end of the day though, I really don't think Tony or any of the guys enjoy putting on this constant act every single day, as we see Junior seemingly feel remorse for firing Bobby and shoving a pie in her face. Near the end of the episode, we also see Tony eventually fold under Melfi and Artie's requests and report Hauser to the police instead of murdering him. And instead of feeling anger and frustration towards this, he comes home elated, professing to Carmela that he feels this way because he didn't have to hurt anybody. He's happy because of the fact that he didn't have to act like a tough guy and rain fire on this PDF file. While you could argue that this is just the result of a drunken stupor rather than him genuinely professing his feelings, at the same time, you gotta think that even drunk Tony probably would have gone through with killing this guy. I mean, come on, he's a pedophile. Surely Tony would have killed this guy in an instant when given the chance. But no, he ends up backing out. And he feels amazing for it because of the fact that he was able to take his mask off for just a brief moment without anyone lambasting him for it. Overall, this episode is pretty goddamn amazing. It's insane how a plot about a guy not wanting anyone to find out that he eats pussy turned out to be so fucking captivating. The writing in this show is genuinely some of the best I've ever seen in a TV show, even with how ridiculous some of the scenarios seem on paper. The humor in this episode is great, and I thought James Gandolfini in particular did a pretty great acting job. Don't worry, we'll be delving more into his unbelievable performance in the show later. I want to save that whole segment for a different episode. Overall, I'm feeling yet another S tier for this episode. Yes, I did put the episode where Junior eats pussy over the one that changed television as a whole. Who's gonna stop me, huh? Huh? Season 1, Episode 10. A hit is a hit. The episode begins with Chris, Pussy, and Paulie stealing a shitload of money from a drug dealer, as Tony hands Dr. Cusamano over some illegal cigars as a thank you for recommending Melfi to him. He gets a call from Paulie, who tells Tony that the job is done and that it's one of the biggest scores he'll ever see. Dr. Cusamano invites Tony to play some golf at the club with some friends of his, as Tony celebrates the massive score with some friends of his own. He and Paulie play some rounds of Battleship as Chris heads back home to be with Adriana, where he takes her to an expensive dinner and a show. Chris's impatient ass starts yelling for them to put the damn fries in the bag, as this dude with a big ass blue hat starts talking to Chris while word gets around the restaurant about his involvement with Tony's crew. This guy named Orange J tells Chris that he's involved with gangster rapper Massive Genius, the dude with a blue hat, and invites the two to a party, saying that there's business to be done with him and Tony Soprano's crew. Chris and Adriana meet with Massive Genius, where he shows them all of his gold records and insane weaponry, and brings the two outside to discuss his business. He tells Chris that he's acting on behalf of the mother of a deceased black singer who got his royalties stolen by Hesh, and says that she's demanding for said royalties back. Chris tells Massive that Hesh is probably not going to be very generous when he hears this news, and Massive walks away, telling him to enjoy the party. Chris talks about how jealous he is of Massive, saying that Massive only claims to be a gangster while Chris is the real deal. Yet Massive has a big mansion and celebrity connections while Chris only works in the pork store. Chris has much bigger aspirations for his validation than just making it to the top. He wants to make it to the top and be known for it, explaining why he's always writing scripts for a potential mafia movie and seeking out deals with movie studios. He's very misguided, but he's still extremely motivated, goddammit. He's basically the living embodiment of those imaginary arguments you make while taking a shower that you end up winning. Chris talks about how Italians used to rule the music industry with talented artists and by paying off radio DJs, and how that power got stolen by black people. Adriana's like, damn, that's racist, and plays Battleship with Chris, as Carm worries about not being able to pay for Meadow's college fund, but Tony tells her not to worry about it. Carm's like, wait, did you just make a big score? And Tony's like, no. Adriana tells Chris about her dreams about becoming a music manager, and pitches Chris the idea of setting her up by using her ex-boyfriend's band as a starting point. Chris, who's still pissing cash from the big score, says sure, fuck it, and agrees to it. Massive heads over to Hesh's house for the sit-down, where he makes fun of Hesh for being a shit ghostwriter. And while Hesh tries to defend himself by saying that he helped a lot of artists get their start, Massive's like, cool, but I still want my fucking money. Hesh and Massive actually sit down in their sit-down, where Massive says, dude, just get me my money, and then leaves. Dr. Cusamano starts entering his cringe era as he talks about Tony Soprano and flexes about his super cool connections with a table.
Sometimes I think the only thing separating American business from the mobs is fucking whacking somebody.
Ew. Adriana shows off her ex-boyfriend's band, Visiting Day, to Chris and Massive Genius, who start bombing on stage as everyone starts booing them. Chris asks Massive if he's interested in helping Visiting Day grow, and he agrees as we're taken back to Melfi's dinner, where Dr. Cusamano continues being extremely awkward talking about the mafia. Melfi goes upstairs and looks out the bathroom window, where she hears the sounds of Tony Soprano taking a massive shit. While Chris is a little unsure over Visiting Day's potential, Adriana reassures him that it'll be fine, as she's having them create a demo recording, which will be financed out of Chris's pocket. Tony talks to Melfi about how he wants to associate himself more with Medigans, but that he fears what everyone else in the mafia would think. Melfi talks to Tony about some really weird shitting noises that she overheard the night before, and Tony's like, weird noises? Huh? Couldn't be me. Nope. Couldn't be me. No, siree, couldn't have been me. I've never made a noise in my life. Tony heads to a grill out with Carm, where Dr. Cusamano and his gang of nerds try to pander to Tony by talking all manly and swearing and talking about tits. As Hesh reflects on the guy that he stole from, Visiting Day is taking all fucking day to record their demo. Chris is really crissed off that it's taking so long because it's costing him a shitload of cash. So he becomes an encouraging role model for the band and forces them to take cocaine. Richie tells Chris that he's not doing that shit as an argument starts with the rest of the band about who did this wrong and someone did that right, but actually they did this, that right, wrong. And Chris says fuck it and hits Richie with a guitar.
Big man, huh?
Carm tries keeping up with the Joneses by keeping up with the Cusamanos, keeping up with the stock market the same way that they do. Carm quickly says, wow, this sucks, and decides to spend some time with Meadow instead, as Tony spends some time playing golf with Dr. Cusamano and his friends. Well, I use the term friends loosely, as they've basically only invited Tony over to annoy him with constant questions about the mafia, using him as more of an accessory rather than a person. They're like, hey, The Godfather, was it real or not? Mamma mia and stuff. And Tony used this as an opportunity to fuck with them.
Did you ever meet John Gotti?
Yeah. I knew John.
Whoa, fuck.
Remember Bungalow Bar?
The ice cream trucks?
Well, they're auctioning off the last Bungalow Bar truck. And I wanted it as a souvenir. Gotti outbid me. Gave me a ride home. You know, he rang that bell the whole way home.
Whoa, fuck.
Adriana and Chris show Massive the demo recording, which Massive seems to really like. However, when Chris shows the record to Hesh, he does not like it in the slightest. Man, Hesh is such a dick. How can he not like this record? I'm sure it's great.
No.
Hesh is 100% right and begins to school Chris, telling him that he's worked in the industry for years and witnessed many artists grow in his time, and that he can tell what is a hit and what's not a hit. Chris says that Hesh is only mad at Chris because he defended Massive Genius at the sit-down, but Hesh tells him to fuck off. Tony tells Melfi his frustrations of being treated like an accessory to Dr. Cusamano's friends, retelling a story from his childhood where he and his friend made fun of a kid with a cleft palate and only kept him around for a cheap laugh. Tony says that he later learned in life that the kid was going home every night crying himself to sleep, which he said made him feel bad, but that he didn't quite understand how he felt. Until now.
Well, you thought Cusamano was your friend.
You live, you learn.
Man, this is a really strong character moment for Tony. I'll bet that he won't make fun of anyone ever again. Come on, you already know he did.
Give me your money.
Massive Genius gets a call from Hesh, saying that he's not paying. And Massive says that he's going to take a classic ultra gangster no-holds-barred approach and take Hesh to court. Hesh says that he's gonna countersue, citing an unauthorized sample that he used in one of his records. And Massive hangs up the phone, with the rest of the boys calling Massive a phony. Chris is still pissy about their fight over the demo recording and all that, and uses the power of positive visualization to tell Adriana that Visiting Day sucks. He tells Adriana that he's only gotten this far up the ladder because Massive Genius wants to get in her pants, and that everyone else that he's talked to says that the band stinks. Chris and Adriana have another argument. Chris says, "Please no, baby, I love you," and Adriana tells Chris to eat her clit and leaves. Tony does something really funny to retaliate against Dr. Cusamano's douchebaggery. He creates a package with an assload of sand and sends it over to Cusamano, telling him to hold on to it for him for a long while, which makes Cusamano piss his pants just an itty-bitty bit. Tony heads down to the basement, where it's revealed that the shitting noises were actually coming from Tony working out, and Chris listens to a song about how nobody loves him, which Hesh calls a hit as he walks out.
What is it? Heroin?
Shit, Gene, I don't know. A weapon? I don't know. Don't touch it.
And that's the end of the episode. You know, I don't really like to use the term filler episode whenever I make these types of videos on serial dramas, because more often than not, every episode serves its own purpose in moving the story forward, even when there's not really much going on. In Better Call Saul, there really isn't a single filler episode, because each episode moves the plot forward in some way, shape, or form. However, unfortunately, that is not the case with The Sopranos, because this episode is one that I would absolutely classify as a filler episode. We really aren't given much of anything in terms of story or character moments, and what we are given is just really uninteresting and boring. It's pretty disappointing considering the massive development between Junior and Tony's rivalry that we just witnessed last episode, and we immediately followed that up with this really boring plot about Chris dealing with some random rapper nobody cares about. We're given commentary on racism and racial tension between black people and members of the mafia, but it goes basically nowhere beyond, "Oh man, they sure don't like each other, gee willikers." These issues are explored a lot better in future episodes of the show, but for now, we're stuck with these really boring bits of commentary. Don't get anything confused though, I still like myself a good Christopher-focused episode. Emphasis on good. The Legend of Tennessee Moltisanti was a fantastic Chris-centered episode because we got to see him develop more as a person as we explored his frustrations and insecurities. In this episode, we just see him get dragged into some random conflict, spend a shit ton of money on Adriana, and then smash some dude with a guitar. It really gave nothing of value. "Oh, please, baby, I spent so much money on you." "No, you're such a bitch, get out." I enjoyed the subplot of Tony being used by Cusamano as a prop, though. I loved seeing Cusamano and his buddies act all douchey and annoying towards Tony getting pissed off about this, and then all of it paying off by Tony pranking Cusamano near the end. That takes up like 15% of the episode, though, so it's barely anything. I've seen a lot of people defend this episode's honor like it's their only child, but allow me, if you will, to paraphrase a sentence from this very episode. An S tier is an S tier, and this episode, my friend, is no S tier. In probably one of the first times on this entire channel, I am genuinely feeling a D tier on this episode. Some fine moments here and there, but those moments are completely washed out by an uninteresting plot that doesn't move the story nor the characters anywhere. I hate to say it, but it really is just a filler episode. The guitar moment was funny though. Season 1, Episode 11. Nobody knows anything.
Got myself a gun. Got myself...
Ow, my foot! Paulie and the boys are having a double S tier battleship session, and the pussy is so good that it causes one of them to have a heart attack. As it turns out though, Pussy's back was just acting up like crazy, and they all decide to leave the Diddy party early. Oh my god, a title card transition? In my Sopranos? Jimmy, Pussy, and a couple of other dudes play poker. And as Jimmy makes fun of Pussy for having a bad back, Karma immediately strikes back by sending in the entire FBI to investigate the place. As the cops find a shitload of guns, Pussy musters up every ounce of energy in his body and runs away from the scene, and manages to run 3 entire inches before being stopped by a cop. While Tony and the boys express concern over Jimmy's arrest, Pussy walks into the Bing, where he tells the boys that he got bailed out by his wife. Pussy says that he lost a ton of money from the whole ordeal, and walks away from the scene as he complains about his stupid back.
Never mind, I need a drink.
Why did he have to fart here? What point was there to Pussy shitting his pants as he leaves the table? And this is HBO we're talking about. You're telling me that better fart sound effects weren't in the budget? Trust me, this isn't the first time or the last time we'll be getting completely pointless farts in the show. We got one from Tony just 2 episodes ago. Somebody had to consciously play that fart sound effect in a studio somewhere, say, "Alright, that sounds good enough to me," and then put it in. This is an Emmy-winning show. Anyways, Pussy farts as he leaves the table. Or queefs, I guess, because his name is Pussy.
And the award for worst joke goes to Beatwise!
People ask me what I'd do if I didn't win. I don't know. Tony talks with Detective Home Alone Dad, and he acts like a whiny prick because Tony called him some mean words. It turns out the detective's in a bad mood for a pretty good reason, as he informs Tony of some really bad news regarding Pussy.
Bumpin' Sorrow.
Pussy? What about him?
He's wired for sound.
What?
Tony is taken aback by this, as he yells at the detective to get a definitive report while also sadly saying that it can't be. And the detective tells Tony that it's pretty obvious, reminding Tony of Pussy's supposed visit to Vegas during a big heroin bust, along with the fact that he somehow got bailed out of prison so easily despite being a known wise guy. At a big open house, Tony calls Pussy over to help move a piano out of the house. But Pussy says that he can't because he might mess up the wire underneath his jacket. I mean because his back is all screwed up. As Tony moves the piano with Chris and Paulie, he tells the two to keep an eye on Pussy since he's acting very strangely. And they agree with Tony, telling Tony that he hasn't done his rounds in a week, theorizing that it might be because of him taking perks and not because he's working for the government. Paulie throws even more suspicion onto Pussy by theorizing that Pussy's back might not even be fucked up in the first place, recounting when he recommended Pussy to a doctor that Paulie had gone to recently. And when all the tests were taken on Pussy, they couldn't find a single thing wrong with his back. If the writers on the show weren't subtle, there'd be giant red text on screen in all caps saying, "Pussy is working for the fucking government." Tony complains about how he's feeling like there's this impending doom lingering over him, well with the Junior situation and now this, and asks Melfi about if mental issues can cause someone to think that they're having issues when they really aren't, more specifically with their back. Melfi says that a large amount of stress and responsibility can cause someone to feel this way.
What kind of mental stuff would cause a backache?
Secrets.
Pussy is working for the fucking government. Tony heads to the detective's house later that night, telling Tony the bad news that he couldn't get any true confirmation on Pussy's involvement with the feds. Tony berates the detective, saying that he needs concrete proof before hurting a man that he loves. And the detective has another hissy fit about Tony calling him mean names. He goes on this tangent about how he used to hide under his bed when he was younger on nights when his dad had a little too much of the drink he drank, and asks Tony if he ever feels like hiding under a bed to feel safe, which Tony says that he does. He comes across a bit like he's joking, but I don't know. Considering that everyone in his life is seemingly either working against him or conspiring to kill him, I figure that he really just wants to cuddle up in bed with a teddy bear right about now. This is an actual clip from Sesame Street, by the way. You'd be shocked at how many kids shows have paid homage to the Sopranos. The spawn of Satan lets Carmela into her house and says no to free food because she's evil. And then she complains about having no friends as if she isn't the problem. Carm says that Tony was sad that Livia didn't come to the open house, and tells Livia to quit it with a constant Tony drama and her textbook manipulation.
Well, I am a mother too, don't forget. And you know the power that you have, and you use it like a pro.
Power? What power? I'm a power. I'm a shut-in.
You are bigger than life. You are his mother. And I don't think for 1 second that you don't know what you're doing to him.
Who, me? What did I do?
She continues to act like everyone just wants to see her at her worst and that Jeannie was a saint. But Carm calls bullshit on this, saying that Tony would rather die than see Livia hurt and that she never treated Jeannie like a saint when he was around. Livia's like, "Why would I ever want to date Junior? He's Johnny's brother. I never do that." And Carm's like, "I didn't say you were. What the fuck?" She acts like everyone hates her except Junior for the millionth time. And Carm becomes fed up with her bullshit and leaves. I swear, I don't think I've seen a character in television that I loathe more than Livia Soprano. At least with villains in other shows, they have aspects of their character that make them even the tiniest bit likable. Even Chuck McGill wanted to see his brother improve in some way, even though his methods were extremely abusive and misguided. But with Livia, there was just nothing left. She is just this constant source of bitterness that's strong enough to make you side with anyone who disagrees with her or has to face her wrath, even those who are objectively worse people than she'd ever be. She is the embodiment of the worst family member of every family that's ever existed. She never listens to reason unless it's in her favor, and constantly plays dumb and acts like a frail old lady despite knowing very well the power she possesses. Carmela exposes Livia point blank for the person she really is. And Livia displays the extent of her awfulness by refusing to back down to even the most revealing of accusations, constantly dodging each call out by raising yet another complaint about something completely unrelated or making an accusation of her own that has nothing to do with the conversation at hand. I really don't believe that there's any underlying reason as to why Livia acts the way that she does to everyone around her, especially to Tony. Hell, I think the only reason she bonds with Junior so well is because she now has an easier way to fuck Tony's life over. She may not be able to fuck over his family life, but she can damn well ruin the business end, constantly manipulating Junior into making business decisions that hurt Tony and his crew, as well as revealing information to Junior about Tony that could potentially lead to Tony's demise. No matter how you slice it, Livia is a miserable sack of shit, who hates and manipulates everyone around her in order to get what she wants. And when she doesn't get what she wants, or believes that she's being screwed over, she berates them and does everything in her power to get back at that person and screw them over, even when the thing that they're doing is beneficial and out of love and respect. She has quite literally zero redeeming qualities, and I hope a sinkhole opens up in her apartment and swallows her and everything she owns. So I don't like her. Tony heads to Pussy's house, where he makes fun of Pussy for being ugly. Tony tells Pussy that he's gotta relax a little, but Pussy says that he can't, saying that his back is really starting to screw him over with the mafia and that he might be getting addicted to his meds. Tony reassures Pussy, saying that he's always got friends that would die for him, testing the waters a bit by reminding Pussy of the importance of loyalty. Tony quickly cuts the bullshit and just asks Pussy if he's got something to say to him. And Pussy's like, huh? And Tony drops the question immediately and helps Pussy get some coffee. God damn, I love this shot with Tony eerily staring at Pussy behind his back. He's got that 1940s Disney villain lighting under his face, really showcasing the dread and anger that he feels over the possibility of Pussy being a rat. Tony depressingly sits at the bada bing, as Paulie enters and sits next to him. Tony tells Paulie that Pussy is wearing a wire, which shocks Paulie. Paulie offers Tony that, when push comes to shove, he'll take the responsibility of whacking Pussy for him. But Tony says that he wants to be 110% sure that there is actually a wire on Pussy's body, which Paulie agrees to.
This is our friend we're talking about here. You understand?
I understand.
Tony heads to the retirement home to give Livia some Kanye CDs, but the secretary tells Tony that she's out getting a massage, saying that Junior's visits have really started to make her feel better. Tony leaves, leaving the CDs behind and asking the secretary to tell Livia that her old house is finally sold. Paulie spies on Pussy as his shitty back makes it a pain for him to walk, and he drives over to Pussy while honking his Godfather horn, and tells him that they're gonna go on a little surprise trip. He brings Pussy over to a sauna, where he politely tells Pussy to get naked right now. Pussy's like, nah man, my doctor said heat's bad for me. And Paulie's like,
take your clothes off.
Oh my god.
My doctor mentioned steam and sauna specifically as no-nos. He said stay the fuck away from heat.
I love how childish this conversation is. Take your clothes off right now. Take them off. No, my doctor said it's a big no-no for me. Move! Silvio tells Tony some big news regarding Pussy's involvement with the government, saying that the detective is only giving Tony this info because he has a thing against Pussy, since he's into him for a shit ton of cash and gambling. Tony says that they can't rule anything out yet, since the info hasn't actually been proven false, and tells Silvio to give him some time to think. Detective Home Alone is taking a shower, when he finds out the hard way that he's got some guests at the house that want to have a little talk. He, his prostitute, and several others are arrested as Tony finds out about the arrest on the news the next day. The detective's made fun of on the news for being caught with a prostitute. And Meadow walks in to yap about how America sucks and how every other country has legalized prostitution. And Tony's like, hell yeah, but shut up, I'm trying to eat. The detective gets himself stuck in traffic, and he calmly tells the people in front of him to move just a bit faster.
Come on, goddammit! Come on, let's go! Let's go! Let's go!
The detective eventually resorts to using his badge to get through traffic quicker, and he moves to the side of the road, where he jumps off the bridge? Oh my god. I mean, I knew Kevin was a pain in the ass, but Jesus Christ. Tony gets a call and finds out about his death, and goes to the detective's house and tells the prostitute the bad news. She tells Tony that the detective died because of the unhappiness that he felt about his life, and that she often gave him therapy sessions in the form of late-night sucky-suckies.
What did he come here for, therapy?
You could say that.
Instead of a couch, you use a bed? It's not a bad deal.
Hey, who wouldn't want to sleep with their shrink?
Not this guy! Yeah, it turns out she sucked a lot more out of him than just cum. Tony asked her what the detective thought about his men, and she says that, while he didn't like Paulie, he really didn't have much to say about any of the other guys, including Pussy, making Silvio's argument seem a lot more shaky. Livia goes, after finding out that Tony sold the house, and complains about the situation to Junior. Even Junior's like, why are you complaining about this? You don't even use the house anymore. But Livia retaliates by pulling the classic Livia method of revealing really sensitive information that could lead to someone's downfall because she's a petty bitch. She tells Junior that other capos have been placing their mothers in Green Grove and having secret meetings there. and implies to Junior that they may be plotting something terrible behind Junior's back.
No, I just don't like being put in the middle of things.
You literally put yourself in the middle of this, you fuck. Junior, of course, believes this implication. And while Olivia tries to play the please don't hurt them, please don't hurt them card, Junior tells Olivia that she knows what he has to do. As Tony eats dinner with the family, he gets a ringy-ding-ding at the doorbell, which belongs to Jimmy, who's finally been bailed from prison. As Tony celebrates Jimmy's escape, he asks Tony if they can talk, and they both head down to the basement, where Jimmy starts asking Tony some really weird questions.
You better lay low with that safe house money.
What are you talking about?
They were asking me a lot of questions in there, you know? If I knew anything about the dead Colombian and the apartment and all that.
Wait a second.
So, what are you gonna do about the Colombian money?
Oh my god! Jimmy's the rat! All these really suspicious questions make Tony realize the truth. And Tony tells Jimmy that he's a very lucky guy, considering that he was able to get bailed out on such big charges so quickly. In this incredible scene, Tony rushes over to the pork store and has a meltdown, proclaiming to Silvio that the rat was Jimmy all along. He rants and raves about how horrible this entire situation is, and demands to see Paulie to ask him where Pussy is. Just before Tony starts making any assumptions about Paulie's character, Paulie waltzes through the door, and Tony begins confronting Paulie, intensely asking Paulie where Pussy is at.
Don't fucking lie to me. Did you do it?
No.
Did you fucking do it?
No.
Did you fucking do it? I said no! Now get your fucking hands off.
Tony calms down a bit, saying that it feels like nobody knows anything about Pussy or Jimmy. And Paulie says the last time he saw Pussy was at the sauna, where he refused to take his clothes off, and that the last thing he said to Paulie was, "Go fuck yourself."
I can't find Pussy anywhere.
You and me both, Tony. Tony tells Paulie that Jimmy's the rat, and Silvio says that they should all come down and just have a drink for now. Before I move on, there's something that I really want to talk about. I've been purposefully waiting for the right moment to talk about this, and I think now was the perfect time. That thing is James Gandolfini's performance as Tony Soprano.
You don't think that human beings possess free will?
How come I'm not making fucking pots in Peru? You're born to this shit. You are what you are.
James Gandolfini's performance in The Sopranos is one of the greatest acting performances that I have ever seen in a television show. If Bryan Cranston's performance as Walter White made him a king, James Gandolfini's performance made him a god. I don't think even describing how great his acting is can do it justice without me just showing you an entire episode. The amount of soul and effort that Gandolfini puts into every single scene is honestly hard to comprehend. Even in just the one scene that you saw before, he was able to convey so many emotions, from anger to sadness to frustration to emptiness and defeat. His acting is able to convey so much with so little. Even just a few minutes ago, when he was talking to Jimmy in the basement, there was one line that he delivered that contained so much emotion despite being only a few words long.
You're a lucky man, Jimmy.
In just that one line, you can immediately feel Tony's frustration and betrayal of Jimmy being the rat. He's able to give this almost subliminal confrontation to Jimmy while still coming across as a friend, while at the same time sounding like he's repressing a metric fuck ton of anger. His acting abilities are so through the roof incredible that he's able to make the actors around him give equally insane performances as well. And it's not like Tony Soprano was some fluke role for him either. Despite many of his earlier films before The Sopranos being critical or commercial failures, Gandolfini's performances were almost always given some semblance of praise. James Gandolfini was a major method actor. It's been reported many times the things that Gandolfini would do just so that he could get into character as best as he possibly could, such as intentionally getting terrible sleep so that he could replicate the emotions of restlessness on screen as accurately as possible, and walking around with a rock in his shoe just so that he could piss himself off. Watching interviews of James Gandolfini and videos of people telling stories about him, you'd think that he would have never been able to pull off a role as emotionally exhausting and intense as Tony Soprano. He was basically the exact opposite of the character he portrayed. Humble, happy, caring, hell, even his voice is nothing like Tony's.
I'm not Tony Soprano by any means. You know, it's an exaggeration of everything. And I have a little bit of a temper, but it's, you know, a useless temper. Doesn't accomplish anything generally. It's just a lot of ranting and raving and nothing. But
James Gandolfini's performance as Tony Soprano is one of those acting jobs where you physically cannot imagine another actor taking on the role with the same caliber or charisma as he did. Tony Soprano is the main talking point that everyone refers to whenever The Sopranos is brought up, and that's because of James Gandolfini's absolutely unbelievable performance. If some random college freshman is bringing up your performance at a TV show nearly 20 years after it's been taken off the air, you have absolutely done something right. Like I said, I've been waiting for the right moment to bring this up, and now that I have, I'm glad to say that I'm going to continue to do so non-stop for the rest of this series. Hooray! Stupid douchebag Mikey Palmisi brings back a stolen microwave to his stupid douchebag girlfriend, and he tells her that something big's coming up regarding his paycheck, saying that he might be promoted here soon since Tony Soprano is going to be taken care of. He tells her about Tony's therapy visits, disgusted by this as well as the fact that he was planning on making a move against Junior. The next morning, Tony watches as a boat sails by, anxious and uncertain over the future that awaits him, and he walks off screen, ending the episode. Okay, thank God, a hit is a hit was just a minor setback. Now, this was a great episode. Personally, while I do enjoy the family side of this show a lot, I usually find myself a lot more invested in the mob side. And this episode holds absolutely no punches, creating some really shocking developments in Tony's crew. The main one, of course, being Pussy being a pussy and ratting to the government, allegedly. I loved watching Tony slowly become more and more paranoid as the episode progressed until it eventually winded up into the pork store meltdown that we saw a few moments ago. Kevin's dad from Home Alone's whole arc through this episode eventually ending with him jumping off the bridge was really shocking to see. And I think he did a pretty great acting job this episode. There were some pretty great moments, like Paulie trying to get Pussy to show his pussy, Carm calling Livia out for being a bitch, and of course the whole meltdown in the pork store, along with a scene of this fucking idiot completely giving himself away to Tony. You literally just got out of prison. You can't wait like a week or two to get some info out of him? You gave yourself away, you jack off! Unsurprisingly, this episode's getting an S tier. Man, I really forgot just how great this first season was. Not you. Season 1, Episode 12. Isabella. Fuck! My favorite character's dead! Random old lady! Stupid rat Jimmy complains about having to go to so many funerals lately, and glazes Junior by telling him that he had a point about the hit on Brendan.
Just want you to know, I always thought you had that right too, you know?
Foul in the play, unnecessary dick riding. At Bada Bing, Chris talks to Silvio about Tony's mood lately, speculating that Tony may be depressed, as he hasn't been taking care of himself lately and has been getting bad sleep. Silvio says that there's no way that Tony could be depressed, as Tony lays in bed depressed, while Carm struts into the bedroom talking about her sore nuts. Tony, still overwhelmed about Jimmy being a rat and Pussy's disappearance, quickly gets tired of her nagging and starts talking back to her. But Carm proclaims that this downturn has started long before Pussy decided to take a stroll out of New Jersey. Carm goes out to get a suit for AJ, and Tony goes, "I don't like sunlight," as Carm opens the window to let sunlight in. Tony gets up and looks out the window, where he finds, oh my god. Tony is absolutely entranced by the woman he sees hanging up clothes next door. And he starts losing his mind in the bathroom just a teensy-weensy bit after taking his medication. We're taken back to the funeral, where Junior gets jump-scared while looking at his reflection. He's still pissed about Jimmy running his flap about Brendan's murder, as well as the meetings happening at Green Grove. Mikey tells Junior about another meeting happening there tomorrow as he finally learned about the random old lady, whom Junior reminisces about.
Look at her like that. Mario Lean gave me my first hand job, me and Vincent Miniscalco in the alley behind the chicken market.
Junior?
God, what am I saying at this poor woman's wake?
Imagine getting casted in a huge TV show only to be dead and have the only canonical information about your character be that you gave some dude a hand job. God, I love this fucking show. Junior is pretty nervous about the hit he's put out on Tony, and Mikey tries to reassure him that everything will go smoothly as Junior tries to distract himself with prayer cards. Back at Tony's place, Chris tells Tony that there's absolutely no word on the street about the location of Pussy, as well as the rest of the crew feeding complete bullshit info to Jimmy while he was at the Bing. It's pretty hard to focus on what Chris is saying though, as we're put in Tony's shoes during this scene, who's sweating like a madman red in the face as the focus is put entirely on him while Chris yaps away, with the quiet yet constant sound of water dripping playing in the background. Tony harshly tells Chris not to do anything rash as he heads downstairs to get some clothes, and he later heads outside, picking up a pair of clothes blown away from the hot lady's backyard. He gives the clothes back to the lady, and the lady reveals to be a house guest of the Cusamanos while they're away, revealing to be studying to become a dentist. And Tony flirts with her big time before walking back to his house. Meanwhile, Chris stalks Tony from behind as he takes a drive so that he doesn't crash his car and die. And Tony goes out to get some ciggies as the two hitmen Junior hired spot and ID Tony from their car. Or at least they try to, before Chris blocks their car and is like, "Hum diddly dum, I sure love donuts, hopefully I'm not blocking anyone."
Yo, sir.
Excuse me? What? Could you pull forward so we can get out?
Yeah, give me a minute.
Police department.
Where's your badge?
And I said move this piece of shit fucking now.
I know I brought this up already, but I absolutely love the music that they use in the show, and how the showrunners selectively choose when and where to use it. It almost always fits the scene perfectly, and adds to whatever mood that the scene is trying to convey significantly. This scene in particular uses the song Cry by Thornetta Davis, which adds to the scene and makes it a lot more interesting to watch, even as nothing super crazy happens. With Chris protecting Tony by getting out of his car and looking into the store, while Tony stumbles over to a physician's office. Junior pukes his guts out as he sits in Mikey's car, angry that the hitmen weren't able to kill Tony due to some civilian getting in the way. He's like, wah, I want it to be over, as the contractor for the hitmen arrives at the scene, with Mikey scolding him for the hitmen not killing Tony yet. Donnie tells Mikey that the hitman will carry out the hit tomorrow, and Donnie jokes about the fact that his own mother wants him dead, which makes Junior realize that there's a leak in his operation and tells Mikey to whack him so that he doesn't get disrespected.
Hey, Donnie! Sorry!
They drive away from the scene quickly, with Junior peeking out the glass of the scene like a little boy who got scared by a clown. Tony tells Dr. Melfi that the Prozac and lithium med combo is making him feel like shit, saying that he feels hollow and empty, excluding his feelings toward the hot lady next door, which he brings up to Melfi. He calls himself King Midas in reverse, saying that everything he touches turns to shit, as he feels like a terrible father to his wife and children, as well as a terrible friend for his friends. Melfi suggests having Tony check into a mental treatment center, but Tony says fuck that shit, I'd rather die. And Melfi says that she's increasing his Prozac dosage because he's acting like a poopy head. As Tony gets his prescription, he runs into the lady, who's bought herself a sandwich. But Tony tells her to throw that away and decides to take her out to lunch. The lady reveals her name to be Isabella. Wow, who would have guessed? And the two talk and bond with each other over their Italian heritage, as well as the language itself. Isabella tells Tony stories of Italian life as Tony stares at her, fantasizing and daydreaming about starting a family with her. Isabella's like, what the fuck, are you on meds? And Tony says nuh-uh and asks her about her dental studies.
I was interested mainly in tumors of the gum.
Ha 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 ha, that's really cool, can you suck my dick?
Dad, we're eating.
Fuck! Tony's depressed ass comes down to dinner, with no Junior in sight. Huh, that's weird, I wonder why. And Livia makes everybody miserable by bringing up some mom that shot and killed her whole family. She asks Tony what he's so upset about, as if she hasn't been actively making his life a living hell this entire season. And Meadow says that she's depressed, which Livia responds by saying, oh, my dad came to America with no money and never complained ever, as if she had to do any hard work in her life ever. Tony justifiably leaves dinner and walks back upstairs, and Livia starts crying again, saying that she should just shut her mouth and never come to the house again. And then out of nowhere, a massive fucking nuke gets dropped on Olivia by a United States military jet, incinerating her entire body off the face of the earth. Okay, that last part didn't happen, but God, I wish it did. The next day, Tony continues watching Isabella out the window, and Carm looks out the window as well, noticing the woman. And Tony says, oh, it's nobody. She's a dental student. We had lunch. And then Carm's like, oh, that's cool. I hope you enjoyed it.
You fucking piece of shit.
Oh boy. Livia complains to Junior about how terrible Tony looked as the wind continues to blow like crazy. Wind seems to be a very constant theme throughout this episode, with it being the main reason Tony sparked a conversation with Isabella in the first place. We'll get to why that's the case later. Tony continues to mope around and feel like shit, and his maid reminds him of his appointment with Melfi. Tony eventually walks outside, Isabella nowhere to be seen, and heads over to the shop he went to the day before, buying himself a newspaper and some orange juice. You know, it's funny that Tony's picking out orange juice to drink. In The Godfather, oranges are often placed in scenes to foreshadow dangerous events that are about to take place. Vito Corleone was shot to near death while buying himself a couple oranges. Wouldn't it be really funny if something really bad happened to Tony as a way to pay homage to such a famous and influential film? Oh Christ! Tony rushes inside his car as he attempts to wrestle the hitman's gun out of his hand. As the two struggle, the second hitman runs over to the car and tries to murder Tony himself. The second hitman practically gives Tony his gun, and he hangs on for dear life as Tony continues driving while he hangs off the vehicle. As completely unrealistic and stupid as this scene is, I'm not about to lie and act like I wasn't super fucking hyped when it happened. I fucking love how the soundtrack adds to the tension of the scene and then gets abruptly cut off once Tony processes the fact that he's about to get whacked. How the hell do you miss literally every single shot when your target is inches in front of you? I get the adrenaline high, but Jesus Christ, you don't need to get in front of him to kill him. You could have shot him from your fucking car. What's wrong with you? Idiot! Carm and the family rush to the hospital, with Tony being stitched up in the emergency room. As Carm and the family leave, Agent Harris, the FBI dude from a couple episodes ago, waltzes in for a visit, offering Tony immunity from prosecution in return for some super secret mob info. And while Tony tells Harris to kiss his ass, Harris says that these assassinations are not going to be ending anytime soon, and that relocating his family and giving in to the cops is basically his only way out. Tony says, "No!" and Harris leaves. And Carm tries to convince Tony that this really might be his only option. Tony's like, "Come on, it was just a carjacking. Nobody's out to get me because of my psychiatric visits or anything." But Carm remains firm on her stance. Paulie and Silvio Patrick Bateman walk over to Tony's room, with AJ commenting that they look like they're dressed like mafia members or something.
I don't believe it was a carjacking.
This is a pretty sad character moment, with AJ finally coming to terms with his father's involvement in the mob, feeling sad and nervous for the future as Meadow comforts him. Also, boom mic! I found a boom mic! They left in a boom mic! Junior and Livia watch the news in this satisfying scene as they realize that they completely and utterly fucked up the hit on Tony. And Junior nervously paces around the place as he tries to figure out what the hell to do now. Livia's like, wait, we should see Tony, he's my only son! And we see Tony reunite with the rest of the boys. As they describe the crappy car the assassins drove, Chris realizes that those were the same dudes he blocked off the other day. And Tony asks why Chris was even there in the first place, to which Chris lies by saying he had to take his mom to the doctor. As Paulie answers the door, Chris speculates that the hit had to have been Junior's fault. And Silvio speculates that Junior might have found out about Tony's "I'm secretly the boss" plan. Everyone suspiciously glances at Junior as Junior pretends to be happy that Tony didn't die. And Father Phil decides to drop in for a visit, causing Tony to drop a remark about Phil planning to sleep over.
Tony gabagool, Grandma. It's nothing but fat and nitrates.
Gabagool. Over here.
Hey, long time no see! Livia asks who Meadow is despite literally just having dinner with her like a day or two ago, overcompensating or panicking in order to ward off any "I pitched the assassination to Junior" vibes from Tony. And later that night, Carm drops off Tony to a meeting in her car, and asks her if she told anyone about his meetings. Melfi admits that she made a passing comment to her family about someone potentially working in the mob doing this, but says she never named names, and Tony believes her, lighting up one of her cigarettes. He mentions that his mom has made a few passing comments, but says that she'd never do something this awful, mentioning how erratic she was at their house, meaning that Livia's lies and manipulation worked yet again. Even after all he's been through, Tony says that he's feeling pretty great, saying that getting shot at gives you a real jolt in your system. Tony recounts the fantasy he had while having lunch with Isabella, saying that she was muttering the name Antonio while nursing the baby. And Melfi identifies the baby as Tony himself, implying that Tony internally yearns for a stronger mother figure in his life than the one he's stuck with. And Tony begins to cry himself. Carm pulls up to the car, and Tony lightly brushes Melfi's face before walking away. Stupid fucking idiot Livia looks around for her slipper as Junior angrily barges in, yelling at Livia for conveniently forgetting about her own granddaughter right after the hit went wrong, implying that Livia is trying to shift the blame on the Junior instead. Livia tries to use the same manipulation tactics on Junior by saying she's just getting old, but Junior immediately sees through her bullshit and storms off. Tony walks over to the Cusamanos, and asks Dr. Cusamano while he's wearing his Walter White getup where Isabella went. Dr. Cusamano has absolutely no idea what Tony's talking about, saying that they only had some dude come in to look after the dog every once in a while. Tony walks away, confused, and asks Carm about the situation, who's equally as confused, saying that the two never even had an argument in the first place. In this absolutely insane plot twist, it turns out that there was no Isabella in the first place, and that all of the conversations he had with her, the lunch he took her to, even the clothes she wore were all completely in Tony's head as a result of his medication. He tells Dr. Melfi this news, who is equally as shocked as Tony, and tells him to flush it immediately. She tells Tony the significance of this hallucination, saying that these coincide with Tony's issues with his mom, and asks Tony the very, very interesting question of why he's having these hallucinations now, possibly making Tony subconsciously realize that Livia may have been a part of his near assassination.
Are you still feeling okay?
I feel pretty good, actually. When I find out who took a shot at me, I'm gonna feel even better.
Yet another amazing episode. As you're going to be seeing throughout this list, The Sopranos has a tendency to make the penultimate episodes of their seasons either as good or even better than the actual final episodes. And this episode right here is no exception. The plot twist that Isabella was merely a figment of Tony's imagination was one that made me nearly shit my pants when I first watched this episode. And watching the season-long plot of Junior calling the hit on Tony pay off was equally as satisfying and fun to watch. Even as early as Meadowlands, The Sopranos has taught its viewers to never truly trust what's going on their television screens. And that trust is put to the test in this episode. We're frequently put into Tony's hazy point of view this entire episode, with the help of some unique soundtrack choices and odd experimental camera work. You can't help but feel the same uneasiness and paranoia that Tony feels throughout this episode, which is thanks to the incredible efforts put on by the crew. Bravo, Gabagool.
Gabagool, over here.
Livia's manipulation is put on full display this episode, lying through her teeth to even her closest family members as the hit goes down. She even attempts to throw Junior under the bus and then manipulate him into thinking that she's just aging, really showing how she just has no love or empathy for the people around her. As if coercing Junior into plotting a hit on Tony didn't give that away already. James Gandolfini's acting was genuinely incredible this episode. I felt sick even watching him move around and lays in bed. Gandolfini genuinely looked sick and exhausted throughout this episode. His panic and excitement in the car chase is incredibly contagious, and his sadness over his internal need for a stronger mother figure was incredibly sad to witness. If an actor can make you feel something, not just pretend to act a certain way, but make the audience feel what they do, that is the sign of an amazing actor, which, as I have and will continue to say, James Gandolfini truly is. To the surprise of no one, this episode is also getting an S tier. Holy shit, what a hot streak! Season 1, Episode 13. I Dream of Jeannie Cusamano. Oh yeah! Final episode, baby! The boys have a meeting with Jimmy at the pork store, proving to Junior once and for all that Jimmy is a certified rat. Junior approves a hit on Jimmy, and later that night, Chris brings Jimmy over to a hotel room to play Battleship with some Russian chicks. However, this game of Battleship turns into a game of Clue, as it's Silvio in the hotel with the pistol, who's responsible for the death of Jimmy Altieri. Meadow makes out with this guy on the couch, when they're rudely interrupted by Livia, who somehow managed to escape the nursing home in the middle of the night and travel to the Sopranos household. AJ quits his late night gooning session and talks to Livia, who pretends to have memory issues as she barges her way into the house, yelling at Meadow believing that she's her long-lost aunt. A police officer walks into the house and takes Livia back to the nursing home instead of the electric chair where she belongs. And Tony later talks about this issue with Melfi, saying that she's being tested for Alzheimer's and being transferred to the nursing unit. Melfi mentions what she brought up last episode, saying that it's really weird that she's only having these issues immediately after the assassination attempt failed. And while Tony says that he has a pretty good idea of who was truly behind this attack, Melfi recaps the events, saying that Tony's hallucinations of wanting a strong mother figure was his subconscious yelling something at him, essentially trying to say to Tony, hey, I think it was your fucking mother. Tony tries to combat these allegations, but Melfi keeps pulling out receipt after receipt. What with Livia talking about babies being thrown out windows, along with Tony's penis dream representing castration of his manhood, figuratively speaking. Melfi believes that Livia has borderline personality disorder, mentioning how she's very good at creating very unstable relationships with the people around her, as well as her constant paranoia over issues that don't even exist.
Twisted fucking bitch.
Oh shit. Despite Tony knowing that Melfi might be right about Livia's involvement in the assassination, Tony's love for her prevails as he attempts to discredit everything Melfi has said, proclaiming that his mother isn't some basket case as he storms out of the room, saying that he's done with therapy as Melfi locks and barricades the door out of fear. Jackie's wife, Rosalie April, talks about how things would be different had Jackie not died of cancer, as Artie happily gives the lady some free food. Extremely happy about the insurance money coming through as his new restaurant is built around him. Carm tells Artie about Livia's testing, and Artie gives his condolences to her as Charmaine is still pissed with Carmela, saying that she doesn't want Vesuvio to turn into another mob hangout. Artie says I hate you, you suck, as Charmaine kills one of the many bugs crawling around the restaurant. And Father Phil flexes his watch that he got from Rosalie and makes fun of her for having a dead husband. Later that night, some Budweiser dude goes oh good heavens as he trips over the rotting corpse of Jimmy Altieri. And Tony is taken to a secret underground meeting with Agent Harris and a few others, including the Italian dude who tried to fuck him a few episodes back. They try to convince Tony to give them some info by appealing to his Italian pride, but Tony says to shut up and get along with that. And they play a tape of Junior and Livia discussing Tony seeing a psychiatrist, confirming to Tony once and for all that Livia and Junior were in cahoots with each other and planned Tony's assassination, leaving Tony very distraught. Meanwhile, Artie delivers some pasta to Livia to make her feel better.
Oh.
What?
Well, how are you, Arthur?
What the fuck is this editing? As Artie does this nice favor for Livia, Livia pays him back by stabbing Tony in the back for the millionth time by leaking the deets of Tony secretly blowing up Artie's restaurant way back at the beginning of the season, which makes Artie absolutely furious. We're taken to the Bing, where we're given this really subtle but absolutely hilarious exchange.
Our theory's wake is tonight. I phoned in a bomb scare.
See, now that's over the top.
It's like the most harmless joke ever, and Silvio is just disgusted and immediately just stops it right in its tracks. This guy literally just killed someone like 5 seconds ago, and he draws the line of the small joke making fun of the dude that he killed. This entire show is filled to the brim with short but loaded exchanges like these. And as much as I want to mention and show every single one of them, well, this video is long enough as is. Plus, I don't think HBO would exactly be pleased. Tony walks into the Bing and informs the boys that Junior and Mikey were behind the hit, not mentioning Livia's involvement, and tells them to start things moving, first by setting up a hit on Chucky Signore, a close associate of Mikey, since they assume that he will be the next guy to try and take Tony out, as hiring assassins didn't work out too well last time for Junior. Tony sits up in bed as he tells Carm about how distraught he is over Livia wanting him dead. But Carm calls Livia a peculiar duck, very cool choice of words, and talks about her anger towards her actions, saying that this Alzheimer's deal is just a knack so that she can't be called out on her manipulative bullshit.
Cunnilingus and psychiatry brought us to this.
Tony says that he feels humiliated over this whole ordeal, and that while he'll feel great taking care of Mikey and Junior, he knows that there will always be one other person behind his near demise. Remember that Chucky guy Tony brought up earlier? Well, I hope you don't like him all that much, because that guy is a goner. This great song called It's Bad You Know by R.L. Burnside plays as Tony and Silvio prepare to make Chucky sleep with the fishes, as Tony wears Chucky's hat just in case some people watched him murder a guy in broad fucking daylight. After this, Tony attempts to talk with Melfi again, who runs back into her office and dials 911 just in case Tony wants another go. But Tony says that he just wants to talk for real this time, and Melfi lets him in. Tony then shoots Melfi right in the face. Haha, just kidding. He admits to Melfi that she was totally right about his mom being behind his attack. Tony talks about how he almost got murdered, but says that they got bigger things to talk about, like his dreams of doing Jean Cusamano from behind doggy style. Wait, do I have those mixed up? Wait, hold on. No, I was right. Tony talks about how he almost got clipped due to these very psychiatric meetings, and informs Melfi that she's very likely in danger and tells her to get the hell out of Dodge ASAP. Melfi says that she can't, since many of her patients are suicidal, and realizes that certain people are going to be murdered here soon. She's incredibly stressed and distraught at this moment as Tony says that she can't go to the cops, and he thanks her for being a good doctor to him before leaving the room. As Tony finishes fucking up Melfi's life for a hot second, Karma strikes back as Artie attempts to fuck up Tony's as well, confronting him about his restaurant with a massive fucking rifle in his hands. Alright, listen, Artie buddy, I get that you're angry and not thinking straight, but what the fuck is the point of the scope? You are literally 2 goddamn inches away from Tony. Anyways, Artie talks about how much that place meant to him and how it got passed down from generation to generation, and explains that Livia leaked the story to him. However, while Livia tried to stab him in the back, Tony uses Livia's own dementia cover story against her by convincing Artie that Livia is getting senile, and that the information he's getting is completely wrong. Artie, believing Tony's story to be true, frustratedly smashes his gun against his car and drives away. While Tony was obviously fending for his life here, even Tony isn't exempt from implementing the same manipulation techniques that Livia uses. As Albert Einstein once famously said, the mentally ill apple doesn't fall far from the mentally ill tree. Ha! Got him. We transition to this extremely awkward dinner with a family, where Junior pretends to not have called a hit out on Tony while the rest of the family just kind of sits there. Tony asks Livia how Artie's doing, and Livia plays the Alzheimer's game again, because God forbid she actually faces the music for once in her life. God, I just don't like her. Artie tells Father Phil that he wants to kill everybody because of this entire ordeal with Tony, and reveals that he didn't actually obtain the insurance money out of fear that he'd be hit with a defamation suit. While Phil advises Artie to go to the police, Artie says nope, and Tony gets the boys together for a meeting, finally admitting once and for all that he's been seeing a psychiatrist. While I'm sure the boys probably would have been shit-talking Tony nonstop behind his back if they heard this anywhere else, they instead decide to dick ride Tony by being like, well, I guess I can see why. Tony says he brings this up because it's the main reason why Junior wanted to attack him. And Silvio laments how the rest of the Mafia can't just simply talk about each other's issues without some major issues popping up. Meanwhile, Carmela walks into the church, where she walks into Phil and Rosalie happily eating lunch together. Realizing that she can no longer have some of that heavenly dick, she throws away the lunch that she had brought into a trash can and walks away. Artie walks around his restaurant with shit in his pants as Charmaine talks about how great the new restaurant is coming along. As Tony wakes up the next morning in a pretty great mood, and we'll be finding out why in approximately 30 seconds. Mikey wakes up for his morning jog as he shit talks his girlfriend, and as he runs down the road, he gets slowly chased down by a car, and he panics as he runs into the woods. Chris and Paulie run out of the car and chase this piece of shit down, with Paulie tragically running into a bunch of poison ivy. Mikey eventually trips into some water and gets shot by Chris, and while he begs for his life, Chris yells at him about how he shot Brendan in his bathtub, and that there's no chance for him to run now. Paulie complains about his poison ivy itching and starts shooting. Look at that, Chris finally got to do something significant for Tony. And it mattered to Chris too? Look at that, Chris! There's your arc! You can tell that Chris is really savoring this moment, as he almost throws his gun at Mikey while shooting him as if it'll give his bullets more strength.
Soprano, FBI. Fuck.
Multiple members of Junior's crew gets arrested as Tony watches the news, disappointed that he wasn't able to kill him. AJ walks into the room like cool as Tony smacks him upside the head, and the news report says that Mikey seems to have fled the scene, with his wife telling the news crew about her last encounter with him.
He told me that he loved me, and that he would be right back.
Ho! You hear me?
Tony gets a call, learning that Jimmy gave the feds a shit ton of information about him and the other members from the Bugs place in the retirement home, and that he's nervous that the guys who got caught may flip to the feds themselves. Artie tells Father Phil that he didn't admit anything to Charmaine, using big words to seem smart when justifying his actions, when in reality he just didn't want to see his wife get pissed with him again. Artie walks away as Father Phil has a look of what the fuck on his face, as Junior is interrogated by the police, saying that he can avoid any and all sentencing if he testifies that he was not the boss of New Jersey, and instead, Tony Soprano was, revealing Tony's entire plot to Junior's face. However, despite this massive deal being offered to him, Junior's ego simply cannot bear the thought of Tony running the mafia being written in the history books, so he rejects the offer. Father Phil tries to hit on Carm, bringing her a DVD of a movie that they could watch later to take some stress off the indictments, and tries to persuade Carm into letting him help Tony with his issues. However, rather than wishing that Tony could change and crying out of guilt like she did back in college, Carm says to Phil that Tony does not give a flying fuck, basically accepting the fact that no amount of help from Father Phil in the church will be able to change Tony's ways. She says that Phil is using this helping Tony shtick as an excuse to gain access to Tony's wealth. And while Phil admits that he does have feelings for Carm that he's trying to work out, Carm brings up him playing kissy kissy with Rosalie April earlier, which makes Phil shit his pants.
I really appreciate everything that you've done for me, Father Phil, truly. But I think you need to look at yourself. 'Cause I think you have this MO where you manipulate spiritually thirsty women. And I think a lot of it is tied up with food somehow, as well as the sexual tension game.
Father Phil has only one word to say.
Whoa.
And he walks out the door with one of the most defeated expressions I've ever seen. Tony walks into the hospital absolutely furious, grabbing a pillow as he heads to Livia's room. But a doctor tells Tony that Livia just had a stroke as a result of the news of Junior's arrest, which makes Tony very happy as he hands the pillow to the doctor. We're given this amazing and incredibly tense scene of Tony confronting Livia about her being behind the hit, with Tony berating and shaming Livia. She's bound to the bed carried by two doctors. As the doctors tell Tony to back off, Tony punches one of them in the face, and two security guards hold Tony back as he yells at his mom from afar.
He doesn't understand you.
She's smiling! Look at the look on her face! Look at the look on her face! She's smiling! Come on! Look at her face!
Tony defeatedly walks away as he drives to Melfi's office in the rain, confirming that she's left for vacation. And the lights suddenly go out due to the huge storm. Later, Tony tries to drive him and the family over to Aunt Patty's, and they eventually give up and pull over to Artie's restaurant. As AJ completely fucks up and loses his umbrella, Tony asks Artie if they can come inside to eat. And while Artie initially hesitates due to it being too close to closing time, he eventually lets them inside, where it's revealed that Paulie, Silvio, and Chris are eating there too, with Paulie looking like he's literally molding from the inside out due to the poison ivy. As Tony orders dinner for the table, Silvio and Paulie talk about Tony seeing a psychiatrist, with Silvio essentially saying that he doesn't really give a shit, as Paulie says that he only gives a shit about the fact that it's a female shrink. In this strangely peaceful ending, Artie serves the Sopranos their dinner. And before they eat, Tony raises a toast, telling AJ, Carm, and Meadow to always be thankful for the little moments in life. In the past, present, and future, when they eventually start families of their own. They all clink their glasses together as the storm continues raging outside, and the episode fades to black. You know, I wasn't kidding when I said these finales were good shit. This entire episode was a very satisfying payoff to what every episode has been building up to this season, with a great blend of action, confrontations, humor, and abusive family members. So many memorable moments throughout this episode, from the hit on Mikey, to Tony yelling at Melfi, to Melfi eventually being proven right. It's just an incredibly solid finale episode all around. We even got something of a resolution to Father Phil and Carm's relationship, which, if I'm being honest, I completely forgot even happened in the first place on rewatch, but it was still a very entertaining scene anyways.
Whoa.
You can probably guess where I'm going to place this episode. That's right, the very tippy top of S tier. Man, you could call this tier list a snake with all the noises it's making. Overall, I Dream of Jeannie Cusamano deserves its high ranking. A great ending to a shockingly amazing season. You know, it's kind of shocking on rewatch just how incredible season 1 of The Sopranos is. For whatever reason, I always remembered this season being only pretty good with some good scenes here and there, but god damn, this show really hit the ground running right out of the gate. There's such a massive flurry of incredible and memorable episodes, and it's surprising considering that the overall premise sounds kind of basic on paper. Like, you'd think that a show that's 25% therapist talking to their patient would be really boring, but thanks to the extremely layered characters and incredible writing, these scenes turn out to be some of the best that the show has to offer. The blend of action, humor, and emotional substance makes this season incredible, as well as the fact that an entire episode is dedicated to a guy getting chastised for eating pussy. And not only does the entire episode revolve around this plot, but it also turns out to be a major plot point for the season. You're gonna be seeing a lot of that in The Sopranos, where a seemingly insignificant thing turns out to be a massive turning point for the characters. I feel kind of crazy for giving out all these S tiers right off the bat, because The Sopranos is only going to keep getting better and better as it progresses. We might have to create a triple S tier category at this rate if I'm not careful. I think that should speak to how amazing The Sopranos really is, and why I believe you should watch it yourself if you haven't already. Trust me, this show is as amazing as everyone says it is. And I have a feeling that these videos are just gonna keep getting longer and longer, so you'll have plenty of time to watch it yourself as I work on this upcoming series. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in Season 2. Take care.